Welcome to the Geometric View, episode 73, season 7. A whole new season for you to sink your teeth into. This has nothing to do with your dad's dick and your mom's vagina. This is science, bitches.
The vagina and penis is also science.
So the 2022 Electromagnetic
biology.
Universe World Expo was amazing. We'll be releasing the episodes weekly on
The
this
link
channel.
is in the show notes below.
The Geometric
Let's get into the
View.
circuit.
We greatly appreciate your support. The best way to donate to us is on PayPal. Just send money directly to goldenscaling@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
All right, good. So again, welcome everybody. We're going to do an episode. I wanted to start by saying I haven't finished this paper yet about the storage of karma and the junk DNA. It led to a really good discussion the other day, just the proposal of the hypothesis, and I hadn't even written it yet. But I have to remind everybody that I already have this charge distributive network hypothesis. And it's based on the actual research with the electromagnetometers inside the clinic. It's a fractal theory. It's a fractal circuit theory. So the idea is that each point in each meridian or network, what I call a charge distributive network, which the Chinese call Jingluo, that they actually all are fractal, and that the same circuit, symbolic and real circuit, can be used for that meridian, and then also that point all the way to an entire organ structure, and it's on all levels. Is the point of the charge distributive networks. Now the research, what it revealed was that people reported, I want to be careful about how I say this. People reported the greatest drop of self-reported pain on days associated with high proton or at least electrical activity. So thunderstorm days, days high in solar density, new moon, full moon, and dry wintry days. Those were, very, very bright days. So those were the days that people reported the greatest change in their pain level, same day. And then that they had also the greatest drop in their electric fields. Okay, so I hope that that's clear enough. So the theory became, the hypothesis has since moved to the point where positive charges, and this may be associated with the Chinese concept of wind, that the wind being the robber, the carrier of 10,000 diseases, and the robber might be carrying positive charges into the body that then deposit in the neuronal pathways and block normal electron motion in the body, and that the charge distributive networks, the Jingluo, including the 12 main Mai, which are channels, that their basic primary job is to pump out all forms of positive charges, including ions that were made by food, medications, to anything from the solar wind, et cetera, to pump them out. And that is the sense of bad chi leaving. And that also the little chi balls that people make in Tai Chi and other places, Aikido, whatever, that those are actually electric fields, not magnetic fields, because magnetism did not have an involvement. There were no changes in magnetics in any of these cases, at least measurable. So that's the basis of the charge of the CDN. That's the research and theory paper. And then in this paper, I'm talking about whether these charge distributive networks go down to the DNA level and, of course, have communication. And you guys have been talking about thought, and you'd been talking about the layers of thought. And I think it's worth pointing out that a long time ago, before EPEMC, I had a paper on scalar magnetic waves and chi. And in that, there's a bunch of diagrams. If you guys want to use them, they have the chakra circles and the spirals. And this might end up connecting back to the evolution debate. I don't know, but I just wanted to set it up. I've got 45 minutes before my first patient, so I can get pretty involved in the talk. I'm right now. I'm working on the Zipf's law stuff, but the goal of that research is eventually to lead to the creation of a pod, a healing pod, and that healing pod would measure your electric fields. It would do the Kirlian photography. It would do thermal scans, and then to actually then go from diagnosis to healing, actually altering the person's electric fields. And my central hope is that there is a field that can be generated, sort of like in the orgone accumulator, whatever that field is, that pushes out bad energy out of the person, including if they're a bully or a psychopath or anything else that causes their genes to reset. And if that connects to karma, great. I mean, that would be part of this whimsical hypothesis. So that's where I'm at.
Question. I have
Yeah.
a question. What was the electrical voltage potential absolute for the body in your experiment? In other words, was the body slightly negative, or?
No, I didn't use a voltmeter. I use a electromagnetometer, and I measured the electric field coming off the person. So if they're healthy, on average, pretty much on average, if they're healthy, it measured 0 volts per meter.
Okay. What I'm saying is, if we look at the physical universe, we go to atomic structure and cell structure and all the rest of it, you'll find a bias that is slightly negative, a bias that is slightly north magnetic in our normal environment. And the body would I would say that if it's working correctly to the environment in terms of an energy flow system, should be slightly biased negative and slightly biased magnetic north. And that is it. So you're trying to rebalance the electrical flows so that they flow in the correct direction and that they express the correct differentials but remember that one of the reasons why you're not going to see magnetics is the magnetic part of the system will be
Getting some banging in the background there.
Yeah, buddy. The electrical, the magnetic interaction that's occurring in the environment of the body will be 2 sets of magnetic directions that are opposite to each other, so that you're not going to see much in the way of a magnetic field, if at all. It'll be very hard to detect. For the electrical ones, you're going to see a DC voltage negative preference. But you're also going to see AC and radiant electrical behavior in the body. And the same will apply to magnetic behavior as well. So it's not just a single type of electrical flow going on. And so one of the things that are going to affect it, temperature will affect the strength of the magnetic field. If it's warm, your magnetic field will decrease in intensity. If it's cold, it'll increase. The body itself, in terms of temperature, is a charge-driven thing as well. You've got if you're at body temperature or close to body temperature in terms of environment, the body's going to find it very much harder to deal with flow problems. It's like it's if you live in the tropics, there's this magic temperature where people just become a little bit crazy at 92 degrees Fahrenheit, because that's body temperature. The body can't cool correctly in that environment. So you need, people are talking about going into salt environments like salt mines where the temperature is lowered to overcome respiratory issues. The same thing has been experienced with cold environments. Hot environments are not terribly good unless you're trying to get muscle relaxation mechanisms going. Then you've got the salt bath mechanisms. You know, you immerse the body in salt water and it will heal burns and things like that a little bit better than it would be the case otherwise. There's a whole series of research stuff that's occurred over the last, since the 1850s. These health spa springs and all the rest of it, to come up with solutions. But yeah, it's very important that you have a good control over the environmental impacts on the body. So when you're talking about the weather and the position of the moon and all the rest of it, you're talking about the way the geometry of the environmental fields interact with the body to promote the actual correct flow. And there was a research that comes from the rifle stuff. I think there is a device that people use to in alternative healing mechanisms to retune the body's electrical circuitry to get it to work in the correct fashion. I've seen YouTube videos on it. So I know these devices actually exist. They're out there in the real world. They have been used, but the medical profession's not keen on.
Dan Winter, he does Therify, and that's a plasma type electromagnetic healing. So and also brain wave entrainment, brain wave optimization. There's things like that he uses. But real quick, I was studying the I was studying the violet ray that I bought, and that's for voltage healing through your body. And I was listening to this episode on Coast to Coast of this guy who's talking about it, and he says that the body has 1,000,000 volts per meter. So when Ramon said 0 volts per meter, it kind of threw me off.
Are you asking me a question?
I guess, yeah. I heard that the body has generally 1,000,000 volts per meter.
Well, that might be inside the body. I don't know how that's being measured. It sounds like a small measurement that's been multiplied through the understanding of nodes. And I have no comment because I don't have any data on that. But I was measuring electric fields, which means I wasn't touching the body. I was measuring away from the body.
Okay, yeah, the skin, apparently the skin is supposed to have 1,000,000 volts per meter. That's all.
Again, I'm above the surface of the body, so I'm measuring the electric fields coming off of the person, which means, and it makes sense because where the nerves are active, they're probably feeling pain, and that's going to generate an electric field because of all the nerve motion. So the goal in medicine, if we were to boil it down, should be to try and turn everybody's electric fields to 0 volts per meter. Then they won't be having any pain.
Well, it's not so much that. You've got the rifle method, which is using RF frequency of electric field generation. You've got the sound frequency generators. Solutions are the same sort of methods. We're using sound frequency to get the body to respond in a prescribed fashion. But what these two methods and what you're looking for, Ramon, is to re-establish the correct circuit directional flow of electromagnetic energy in the body. And it can be influenced by the external environment quite severely. So, what people eat.
I hate to be that guy, but I'm telling you, when the people felt good, their body produced 0 electric field that was measurable from the outside.
Yeah.
There might be some kind of scalar, mystical field, a birkeland current field of some kind, but that's not this device can't measure that. All it can measure is your typical electric field.
I'm just telling you.
If their CDNs are working, there's no discernible. It measures at 0 volts per meter outside the body. And that's really fascinating because it's not what I expected to find.
Well, I'd expect to find it because the electrical circuit in those circumstances, the electromagnetic circuitry of the body is working correctly. So where all these fields would cancel out. Whereas someone who is sick, I would expect someone who's suffering an illness or injury of some kind to have localized expressions of fields that are non-zero.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you expected, but I didn't expect that. I was looking for magnetism and electricity, electrical fields, and magnetism got discluded, and electric fields became very interesting. And also, in the second or third phase of the experiment, we controlled for static electricity by measuring them at the door when they first walked in before they walked across the carpet. So, you know, there was as much control as we could provide in that phase. This is a 3-phase experiment, and each time the controls got stronger. But in all cases, people who had a problem in an area, of course, everybody was there for a problem. That area would go down by a ratio of over 1, whereas the control groups never were over 1. Never.
Sounds like they're leaking voltage. When you're sick, you're leaking electricity. When you're not sick, you harness it and you.
That's another way of looking at it. Yeah, that is another way of looking at it. So there's a couple of different ways of explaining it. And what's interesting about the way that you just said that is the experience as a healer when you put your hand over an area and you feel. Now, what you feel is different every time, and that's what's interesting too. Is the charge actually different? But sometimes you feel a cold wind, sometimes you feel prickles, sometimes you feel heat, and then we're talking, you know, more than a few inches away. Sometimes you can feel a hole, and sometimes you can feel an excess. And these are all things that the Chinese described in the classics and in the words. So that isn't what's changed. What's changed is our ability to identify. And there just might be different kinds of charge that are actually being lost or expressed in energy field. So my goal is for the machine to actually be capable of measuring that with the help of a human, and to actually display it. And that all goes into my personal designs for that. But
what about the difference between physical harm that's come to the body versus emotional harm?
It actually doesn't. That's not what seems to determine it. So let's say that a person has the COVID, and you feel over the lung. You probably will feel a cold wind coming up and hitting the hand. But you could get that if I punched you in the shoulder. You can get the same thing. Probably not right away. Probably in the early days of the injury, it's going to come up as a warm, excessive from the swelling, etc. But as the injury is unhealed and the Bing Qi starts to affect the true Qi of the body, the true Qi retreats. Now the area doesn't circulate correctly. You'll end up with the same cold, windy area. So the Chinese just use the word Bing for both, for the strike and for the cold. So both of them are called Bing. So that's pretty fascinating.
Something to be aware of in this process is that the person who is suffering the injury and the person who is the healer, their expectations and belief systems are going to have a massive impact on how the body responds to a resetting of its electromagnetic or its aetic energy transfer.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yesterday, a 16-year-old male who learned that this medicine is powerful, and he obviously did not expect to get nauseated, but and I still don't know what he's eating that he shouldn't be eating. I suspect it's marijuana related, but I don't make accusations in front of moms. So, but he got seriously nauseated. He had the needles and then the oil too, and his color went pale, and then he turned a little green, then his color returned. But he's got a series of conditions that are also so serious. I mean, genetic conditions that if he wanted to hide his dietary habits and any drug habits, he can, and there's not any way for me to force him to just give that stuff out. But I can feel it when I'm in the presence of a person who's been raped, beaten, if they're on drugs, that they have done drugs, they've been doing drugs, all that stuff can be felt in just the energy presence when you walk in the room.
Yeah, that's because it mucks up their
Their
basic field
field.
structures.
Correct. Exactly.
All I'm saying is that for the person, she's on Electric Universe in 2015, did a presentation on sound.
Music, yeah.
Research in sound healing. I can't remember her name directly, but she's set up these sound therapy systems all over the world. What she used was tuning forks, and she'd fire the tuning fork and move around the body positionally in space, not actually touching the body, but the sound of the tuning fork could change depending on where it was. And
I think you're talking about Aline McCusick.
Yeah.
And there's so what we're saying is that sound is producing a resonance mechanism that the body's responding to, and that resonant mechanism can be also set up with RF frequency. It can also be set up with light frequencies, so color healing techniques. So there's multiple ways of getting to this resetting of the body, so that the flow of energy through the body reestablishes into what it's supposed to be. And in the process, you would see all these aberrant field structures that are going to react violently with the environment to disappear. And that was one of the reasons why I was saying that if the body is not in a healthy state, you will see electromagnetic and other behavior that's field related and resonant related that suddenly becomes visible. And the healing process is about reversing whatever that damage is to get that to go away. Because one of the things about in the speculation I have is that the universe's goal is to get rid of charge difference, the differentials. In other words, the universe is trying to achieve an energy state where all the charges in terms of difference in potential have been minimized. Try to be minimized.
Yeah, I agree. And that would be the Schumann cavity. That would be the Schumann resonance. It's trying to get rid of and deplete charge in the most efficient manner through all creatures on the same exact circuit, the global electric circuit.
But in a charge environment that is dominant. In other words, if we looked at the electrical field structures or the electromagnetic field structures of at the surface of the Earth, that environment electrically and magnetically is different to the environment in space, where it's a different set of balances that occur to create a stable system. So the sort of stuff that Ramon is talking about, I would, from a theoretical point of view, I would expect that behavior to be there. And the fact that Ramon has detected it and described it, and he's not the only one that's done this, says to me that my understanding of how a balanced, healthy system works is probably closer to true than I realized was the case when I wrote it. So,
well, no, I'm not the only one. The difference in my work and that of the electrical engineer acupuncturist, because I'm not the only one the only electrical engineer that's become an acupuncturist, but those guys, whether the European guys or the guy in Taiwan, they didn't have a circuit level diagram. They had a functional block diagram using Y diagrams, and describing it through fractal wave theory. So it's just building upon their work and then turning it into an actual circuit diagram. And then that comes up again in this new work, particularly the real paradox of how the circuits might flow backwards. And what I've done is I've included a set of paradoxes in the paper that have to do with karma. And then I've included a series of case studies which are paradoxical to each other. And they're very fascinating. They're some of the most fascinating cases that I've had. Certainly they stand out, or at least that I'm familiar with. In one case, it's just a person I'm familiar with and has nothing to do with, I actually never treated him. But these paradoxes in these case studies, what they do is they set up a condition where, in order for us to describe the law of causality correctly, we cannot use a linear system like Newton did, or even as simple as the Bible says, right? Because the Bible just says, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap," and then it has a number of variations of that. But that's not exactly completely supported in this. There is going to be a section later that I write after the test proposal, and the section is called "Sin, Karma, Illness, Jesus, and the Religious Search for Purity." And that I'm only going to include that section to talk about what effect it might have on the DNA, to talk about sin and et cetera. But there's something happening in the law of causality that is, because of the recursion, because of the fractalicity in general in the law of relativity, this recursive nature and things to be stored. I'm not in this paper going to talk about the Akashic, but talking about the DNA, the relation of the DNA through electricity to the actions that have happened in one's life. And right now I'm going through this team theory, which Teddy shared, this Van der Sloot, what is his name here? Vendramini. It's fascinating stuff that I think it's actually really important. And the reason why I think it's really important is, okay, so we have the POS theory, right? We have the change theory and the POS theory. We have people behaving in ways that we all know they shouldn't, right? And that includes regular everyday people that are participating, even though they're not necessarily POSs. And I gave the example the other day of the guy spraying weeds along the culvert, even though the culvert was going to lead the poisons directly into the water supply, and he would be drinking it. So he's not necessarily being a POS, but he's just not thinking about the long-term ramifications of the poison.
That's ignoramus.
It's an ignoramus for sure. So when we have this widespread dukkha that creates suffering because of the ignorance, the real good word for it is nescience, which is like anti-science. And what will happen is there will become a reinforced degradation of the DNA, where after the degradation of the DNA, some people who are born, this would be my hypothesis, will be physically incapable of considering high-minded things, and that the number of people who can perform science will be reduced, and so that the actual law of evolution will take place, and then you once again get a forward progress in the genes. But the number of people who can actually think like Stephen Hawking will be decreased, and the number of people who think like holding down the block will be increased. And in this way, it's an idiocracy. It's not the same theory. I mean, in that movie, they're saying it's basically exactly breeding. But what I'm saying is that the poisons and plastics will alter the CDNs and the DNA in people and actually cause people to be incapable of thinking about anything else than their health problems and feeding their stomachs.
Yes, which keeps people at Planet Fitness and in the doctor's office.
Right.
One thing
Job
to
security.
be aware of
Right now, Ramon?
in this process. One thing to be aware of in this process is that there is a dual flow mechanism occurring that obeys polarity laws. In other words, you need to be looking for a forward positive flow and a backwards negative flow. The two of these things have to be monitored separately and brought into the correct relationship balance. And there will be relationships of those resonant mechanisms, the flow direction, which will involve the golden ratio, pi, and E. Those three I call them function constants because they're constants driven by, they become a value because of an equation mechanism. But those three things, you got to work out what those factors are in terms of the flow direction and charge polarity. What is the correct relationship for a healthy body and for a healthy lifestyle for those three numbers in particular? Because there'll be a factor, and if what you're trying to do is tune the body to have its the two flows that are in opposite directions to each other correctly balanced. So it's not just a single directional flow, which is very important to understand in the thing. And I don't know how to measure those sorts of behaviors inside a biological mechanism, but they will be present, and they're important into functionality and how information in genes is expressed in the body's function, because the genes will drive the energy flow mechanisms. And if you muck up the gene resonance, you'll muck up the energy flows of the cell structure itself and cause problems.
If you look at diseases, and you look at viral trends, like TikTok trends, even just hearing the name TikTok gives kids tics. There's new tics that have never been around before until TikTok. All these kids are acting like they have tics. You know what a tic is, just acting weird, doing something different. So all these people are acting like they have these tics, which it's memes and it's memetics. So you can control how people's bodily function with just sharing memes. So the meme technology and giving people just the idea, what is that? Power of suggestion, and that seems like an easier way to go about what you're trying to kind of talk about. People get into crystal healing, whether the crystal really heals someone or not. People get into all this stuff, and a lot of it's just power of suggestion and how many people can you get on board.
No, it's not all power of suggestion. I don't know what you mean.
I said a lot. I said a lot of this stuff is power of suggestion.
Yeah, a lot is, but it's not the. The words power of suggestion have been used to dismiss all sorts of things like televangelistic healers and all this kind of thing.
Right.
And that doesn't really help refine the science down to a precision. So I have no idea how that would make it easier, but I can tell you that there is a physiological effect that social media has on people, and I have myself experimented with projecting. Of course, I find somebody that I think is worthy of experiencing my derision, and then I have projected my derision through the etheric medium, through the electric, and I have affected them physically, so as if I had them in the boxing ring. And this is a Tai Chi concept, the ability to stick to an individual or to a situation extends beyond the physical touch of the sticking hands. And use that in debate, dialogue, etc. I've used it so many times. It's unbelievable, and to actually physically affect that from a distance, there is something qualitative that is happening. It's not only psychological.
Yeah, that stuff's been measured. There's a random number generators that are affected by society's consciousness in certain directions that have occurred, and there's research published on this sort of stuff. But I have a story where I don't know whether this is urban legend or not, but there was a person who was in a freezer, rail car freezer. So he's in the compartment which gets cold, and the door closed and he couldn't open it. And this rail car freezer was not active. In other words, it wasn't producing cold in the inside. But when they found this guy dead, his body was frozen, and he'd written on the wall of the things, "It's getting very cold. I can feel it now." And he mentally froze his body and killed himself. So so power of suggestion is very, very real. But what you've got with crystal mechanisms, and I have crystals here that I've been given, that do affect, they amplify. Crystals have got the capacity to amplify the mechanisms that are being generated inside the body in the mind belief system. So they're like a focusing device. And it's not just a case of, I've got to have this tourmaline or I've got to have an agate or whatever to have whatever effect. It's a case of the two have got to be in resonance mechanisms to be able to impact the body. My mother used to use copper. She'd wear a copper bracelet to help her with her arthritis. But and she used to swear by it. So there are people that have magnetic blankets that they can't sleep unless it's partially psychological, but it's also a physical interaction going on where the mind is using the environment to manage the biological functions of the body.
And how much of it is ritual? Think about that. Like, rituals are healing.
Yeah, but
ritual is
still,
you do it every day, it becomes a habit. Then it's a tradition.
Yeah, but it still has proper impact, power over the biological functions that we look at. And this stuff here is not well documented and not well understood. And because it's paranormal, mainstream science wants to, dismiss it just out of hand.
They just don't want to touch it.
Electromagnetic, magnetic fields in space don't do anything. Well, how come your light switches on when you walk in and turn the switch? If the electromagnetic fields don't do anything, then the light globe shouldn't switch. So you've got to get past. The religious and I suppose the bullshit factor that it occurs. The made up mythology rather than the detail. And it's
what I've done in this paper is, even though I've included the detractors who've said that Zipf's law does not apply to the non-coding DNA, and I've included the original work from 1994. I've stated correctly what I think what his motivations were. I softened it up just a little bit, because the way I originally wrote it was maybe too on the nose. I don't want to punch the guy in the nose, but to be frank, it seemed like an attempt to justify prolonged use of psychedelics, given his self-disclosed pseudo addiction to ayahuasca. But it's still, it's a fascinating idea to use this Zipf's law junk DNA hypothesis to talk about the transceiver effect of the mind. And so what I've just done is I've included the original work and then the counter works, and said this paper will take the position that Zipf's law does apply to junk DNA, because it is something that we all here know that they will dismiss it out of hand, and that they will find any way of using mathematics to do that. And so the question is, who here wants to go and peer review all of those papers? I say, and first of all, this is a MIMS paper, not an EPEMC paper. So I just say it's not the point of this paper is to peer review all these works and decide and come down on which side. So I'm just taking that position. Now, so far, I've got 3 hypotheses. Let me read out the 3 hypotheses, okay? Because I haven't even gotten to the actual hypothesis section. But I'm going to read out the 3 hypotheses so I can find the damn things. All right, number 1, karma is not found anatomically, but nor can it be found outside of the body as well. So this is a throwback to some Taoist concepts about the mysterious past. Number 2, the events of one's health life and what happens to the body are stored within the DNA or elsewhere on the person, and if so, where for either case. And that's because muscles do store emotion, and that this paper, I just can't cover all that. And then number 3, I just wrote the centrality of this paper's hypothesis would be that the karma of life's behaviors are transcript or translatable to the same mechanism as is described in the Temic hypothesis. And I'm not going to read out the entire hypothesis, but I'll say this central point here from the paper about Temic inheritance. Basically, you get this emotional trauma is powerful enough to disrupt the central nervous system's homeostasis. And by this means, each Temic mutational encryption creates a unique genetic record of powerful emotions that precipitated the Temic mutation. And he compares the difference between a Paleolithic hominid staring at a sunrise versus a possum being ravaged by a dingo. And that just makes sense. Somehow these instincts are being stored. We know that instincts exist. We know that even babies have instincts, and somehow the information is being stored. Where's it being stored? Why is it being stored? I'm not proposing that all of karma is necessarily stored here. I'm sure that some people will want to talk about, the Akashic or talk about the angels keeping track of you or spirits. Certainly, there have been many instances described, and it's including in Taoism, not only in Judeo-Christianity, of the feeling that you're being watched and everything that you're doing is being recorded. That is a mechanism, but we can't prove that it's happening outside of the mind, because the mind is what's observing. It's sort of like they're trying to use fMRI to describe consciousness, but fMRI was designed by consciousness, and then it's being interpreted by consciousness. So they haven't eliminated the consciousness aspect of it in order to describe what the mind is. And I deal with that in the very beginning of the paper. But something is happening. And I'm taking the position, I'm just automatically assuming the position that Zipf's law is applicable to the junk DNA, and that it does have to do with this team theory. It's fascinating stuff.
I'm going to make some observations for you, and it's probably already in the paper, but I'm not having read it. I'm making some observations. First of all, diseases that affect the breeding age populace are actually transmitted to the children and grandchildren. The disease responses of the body are recorded in the DNA. That's been
right.
shown to be true. The second thing is the idea that junk DNA doesn't do anything is a bit like the idea that magnetic fields in space don't do anything. That DNA would not exist if it didn't have a purpose. And just because we don't understand what that purpose is doesn't mean it doesn't do anything. That's a case of blind, arrogant ignorance in dealing with this stuff. So the DNA that's there that doesn't seem to have a function actually has a function, and we don't understand it. And that function will impact our ability to interact directly with the aethic data store, the biological data store, the Gaia data store, this data store of the planet and the species and all the rest of it. That it provides communication mechanisms, and I really see the body as a television antenna of extreme complexity. It's way beyond TV. The body is going to respond to its environment in a whole series of ways that none of us really appreciate. And you see this, people's societal reactions to the full moon and the new moon and to cold events and hot events and drought and all the rest of this sort. It's much more interactive than people, give credit. And our Western science method of trying to compartmentalize everything is the wrong approach.
Fair enough.
I remember this whole. If you research the Human Genome Project, they were trying to get funding from everyone in the world, and they got lots of funding. And the whole idea here was to map out the human genome, and for what purposes? To give people medicine. They thought that once they had the whole human genome mapped out, that we would have the medicines to cure everything. It was just based on. So
real quick.
This.
I just think it was
let me finish. If I could just finish my talk
Let him finish, Robert.
So the promise was to cure people through the using pharmaceutical things, and what ended up happening, instead of all of this, it took decades to try to for the Human Genome Project, and then it failed. It failed epically. It completely crashed and hit rock bottom, because once they realized that everything wasn't controlled by human genes. There's epigenetics, and then all this stuff that they wanted to call junk DNA. They used the term junk DNA because they wanted to still be able to use pharmaceutical drugs and everything to cure people's ailments. So they started saying that some of the DNA was junk, so that they could still come at it from all of their money that they had invested in it already. So it's not that it's junk DNA. That's just a misnomer. It's definitely a lie.
So let me ask you guys, what do you think about the differences between an individual, based on Zipf's law, an individual chanting these frequencies themselves versus hearing different frequencies externally for the sake of healing?
So that's the Buddhist contention. That's the Buddhist contention. So let me describe Buddhist alchemy.
Hang on. What's Zipf's law?
Zipf's law is a matter of mass relation. It's been used now to describe lots of other systems. It started as a linguistic law. Essentially, there's a relationship between consonants and vowels that is consistent throughout all languages, no matter the form of the language. Even the little, like the African languages where they beat themselves and make pops and zings and everything, the Zipf's law appears to occur there as well. So the implication being originally that it was a linguistic law, that there's some kind of language behavior happening. But now that Zipf's law is used for lots of other kinds of sciences, that it might not be linguistic. It might have to do with charge distribution or nucleotides, the weight of nucleotides, etc. So I'm going to briefly describe the Buddhist alchemy's position on this. You can either read the Lotus Sutra, or you can buy the Buddhist I Ching, which is different than the Taoist I Ching. Either way, the Buddhist position is that when you end karmic outflows and you refine your karma as if it was a substance, and you improve your situation to the point where you then exit karma, you actually get beyond karma, you get beyond form, beyond void, all these things. That when you do this, your body will actually change, and you'll acquire what are called the 32 features and the 108 characteristics. And these numbers described, they're physically listed. You can look them up on the Nichiren library as well if you want. And I do run into people who are clearly life-to-life adepts. And by the way, some of them are female. So in previous lives, they may have been male bodhisattvas, but in this present life, they're female. And they have some of the 32 features and characteristics. And of course, they end up being healers. They end up choosing high-minded approaches. And that ugliness is not something that's just merely an objective measure of hotness and biological availability, but the actual ugliness inside the person's spirit shows up in their face and in their features. So think of drawings of characters like villains, especially like in the Smurfs, Gargamel having the hooked nose, or specific like weaselly teeth. That these kinds of ways the body changes has to do with the thoughts are being projected from the person's. Well, in Buddhism, there's no soul, but from the person's psyche through the DNA, and then actually changing the DNA lifetime to lifetime, so that they carry this information with them through the mind between lives, and you can basically become more handsome. And if you wanted, at that end of the road, according to the Buddhist theory, the Mahayans, if you didn't want to become a Buddha, you could translate it all and become some kind of prince and king. And because the Buddhas are always born as they're always destined to be kings. In Jesus' case, he's the king of the Jews. In Buddha's case, he was the prince of the Shakyas.
To me, that all sounds like hell. That all sounds like the idea here. I think we've all been here. We're all here right now. And I can tell you it ain't heaven, and it ain't paradise.
Right. They don't call it hell, they call it samsara.
Yeah, just the idea of reincarnation puts you right back in samsara or hell.
Yeah.
Whereas
the
if
Tibetans added
if you elevate your thinking beyond that and actually able to rest with the infinite, that would be different. But if your intentions are to refold every time, that's kind of like stuck in samsara or stuck in hell, right?
Yeah. Well, the Buddhists had interesting two things, and when I come back, I'll describe the Buddhistic alchemy vehicle. The first is that the Tibetans responded by including actual hells in between the incarnations in order to purge and purify the person. This is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, of course, and it's much more harsh stuff than what the Christian thought of in Dante's Inferno. And the second is that, yeah, you can think of it that way, but the Buddhists, they came up with the Bodhisattva vehicle, which is that you take the bodhicitta, which is what I have tattooed on my left arm, and you're going to stay in samsara until everybody's enlightened. And so you're essentially promising to be here forever, which means you're promising to become an immortal. So now you are merging the Taoist immortal, who is a cloud walker usually, with this goal to raise the consciousness and enlightenment of everybody on the planet. So,
but there's
anyway,
a lot of different. According to that, there's a lot of different immortalities. That's an immortality through mortality.
That's correct, and it's called the truth of birthlessness. So I have to go treat the patient. When I come back, I'll describe the Bodhisattva.
One of the things I'll observe is that the 32 and the 108 numbers, 32 is a binary sequence result, and the 108 is a prime number basis. So you divide until you get down to your prime number. So it goes from 108 to 54 to 27, and you can keep going. 27's it's not a prime number.
23
3 nines, 27. 3 nines are 27. So what you got is an interaction between a binary and a trinary encoding system. And you're going to see this if you look at pine cones. You get the 5/8. If you follow the pine cones in one direction, clockwise or counterclockwise, you count 5, and in the opposite direction, you count 8. So we've got to understand that the mechanisms of what's going on in terms of interactions is using different encoding mechanisms. The second thing that I would say is when we come back to samsara and life and all the rest of it, the purpose of being alive in this environment is to learn, because you're limited. You don't have the ability to make whatever you want happen exactly the way it is you wish it to be. So it's a learning environment. And some people, if you take, depends on point of view here. If you take the view of reincarnation, you are coming back trying to learn a lesson that it takes a while to do. And your question is how prepared are you to learn? Because that'll determine how fast you progress. So for some people, they come back into the environment that we have to help people get past whatever's blocking them from learning. And you get the teacher or the leader or whatever, the guru, whose job is to lead people. But some people who get into that position get caught up with their own set of bullshit and get distracted. Instead of helping people to move on, they use it for their own advantage and introduce karma and consequence to their behavior. So it's the world we live in, I think, is a corrupting influence to begin with. We're born into corruption, and the trick is to live a life where we're trying to counteract that corruption. And the whole concept of sin and all the rest of it, I think, is a bit wrong in religious understanding. And the Jewish, Islamic, Christian version of it, I think, is not the correct answer, nor is the Buddhist or the Taoist or the Shinto variety either. They're all trying to attack the same problem, but they've got their biases and directions of delusion. That people who live in those systems can delude themselves. I've run into Christians who think that it's okay to ensure salvation of someone's soul by lying to them. And lying to somebody, speaking falsehood and claiming it truth, is blasphemy, and that's the unforgivable sin. That's go to hell and don't return.
The unforgivable sin is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. which is different than just blasphemy.
Yeah, but
Blasphemy
it's
against the Holy
blas-
Spirit is being is what?
You're denying you're denying the truth of God, and that is,
Yeah.
it's a death sentence.
Well, and that is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit is when you know that you should not do something and you're convicted time and time again, and you go against that knowledge that you shouldn't be doing something and you keep doing it. That's not overcoming, and that is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit.
So it goes
And
back
in the Buddhist environment, you've got the same mentality. You know the better way to go, and you refuse to do it. The same will appear in all these other philosophies. And what you're going to see is the desire for people to have an instant coffee solution to all their problems when that doesn't exist. They're expecting someone to come charging in on their white horse and fix things for them, and it's not
right.
That's not the way it works. You have to fix your own problems. It's not up to somebody else to come and help
That's
you
what
out.
That's what we expected to get with the Human Genome Project, but it just tanked. Like all those billions and trillions of dollars.
But the reason why they did the Human Genome Project was not anything to do with helping people to become healthy. It was about figuring out how we can control the masses really easily. So it's an elitist it's the elite project to try and control the entire globe in a global dictatorship.
And at the end of the day, they still used it. They still used it to try to control us by saying that, oh, this DNA is junk. That's no good. You don't need that. Here, we can just mix this with that. And actually, I was listening to Ray Kurzweil on Lex Friedman podcast, and he was talking about synthetic biology, artificial biology, and how we're already there. And actually, the first synthetic biology that we've invented is the Moderna virus, or the Moderna shot that they shot into people. And they don't even know. They say that they're using this as a guise to say that all the drugs in the future will be manufactured like the mRNA Moderna virus, and all the drugs in the future will be like that and affect the whole body synthetically.
Yeah, because they're trying to gain global control in a dictatorship mechanism.
Yep.
The thing is, what I'm going to say is that the environment of the universe will obliterate such things. The universe
but not our
is
perception of it.
Yeah, but the universe is about promoting a life that is a life system that is diverse and vibrant. And a dictatorship control that they're trying to do is about monoculture and a controlled environment, no diversity whatsoever.
Right.
So it is functionally at odds with the universe. And you know, you're human. How are you going and you're on the surface of the Earth? How are you going to hold up the moon from stopping it smacking into the Earth? You're going to get crushed. You don't need a moon-sized rock to do it. You know, just a big rock will crush you. There's no way you can. The universe, the method that the elites are trying to impose upon the control mechanism over the environment, the universe is just way more bigger and way more powerful and way more effective at just snotting something that's out of step. And you see that in biological systems. You know, overfishing produces jellyfish, and jellyfish go into plague proportions, and you get red tides and all the rest of it, which just poisons the biological system to get rid of whatever's causing the imbalance.
Yep.
And this is, you know, we see this in bacterial cultures and all the rest of it. You know, and the utopian experiments with mice, Utopia 1 and 2, prove that, you know, biological systems that are not regulated in a perfect environment, you know, end up in completely dysfunctional solutions
decline.
that are self-destructive.
I think going back to Buddy's comment earlier, this is hell. I think you mentioned that or said that. It sounds like hell, going through a constant recycling. But I think the agenda or the goal for each individual, to your point, Robert, is to elevate your ability and consciousness to a certain state where when you do go through this quote unquote recycling stage, you're able to carry on some of those things to a next level, or at worst case scenario, eliminate your previous. And once you've unquote, I don't even know if unlocking junk DNA is the correct words to use here or not, but the wages of sin are death, it says in the Bible. So ultimately, the human form, the human physical body, we should be creators. We should be allowed and have the ability to create, and utilizing our physical to interact with the spiritual world around us, as well as the physical world to manifest things. I think that's a very high possibility. We just, for some reason, through degradation, I don't know if it's degradation or whatever, but through some means of blocking off certain aspects of our physical capabilities here in the material world, we have to learn these lessons. Yeah, I think that's a true statement. We have to learn these lessons on how to properly control that, so that, and I say we're going to live forever as physical manifestations in this world, but it almost would seem that the life expectancy of each individual human species would be much greater as you unlock these certain capabilities and aspects. And does that make sense? Am I saying anything that's kind of resonating
Yeah,
at
it's
all?
making sense to me. If we go to the biblical reference, we talk about after the Antichrist is wiped out in Revelation, you've got 1,000 years of peace. And the observation I'll go and make, they talk about the eternal kingdom and all the rest of it. If it's eternal, why is it only lasting 1,000 years?
Right.
So,
Well, there's an everlasting gospel too, and that's eternal, and that
yes.
doesn't ever change and doesn't ever stop.
So
Dolores Cannon
there's
did a
an issue.
lot of stuff on this. She did a lot of research with other doctors as well. They were doing the same research on hypnotherapy at the same time. I'm not sure if you guys
Yeah.
have read a lot of her stuff, but they've done a lot of research and were doing these kind of hypnotherapic sessions individually of one another, but coming to very much so the same results from each individual patient, based upon this recycling through the lessons being learned, all of what we're discussing here.
While you're sick, you become sick if you don't learn your lesson. If you keep doing the same thing, that's a sickness, and you keep doing the same thing expecting different results. I mean, what the whole point is, and going to the biblical reference is in Revelation. It talks about the rewards that are given to those that overcome. What are you overcoming? It doesn't say what you are to overcome. You already know what you need to overcome. The more sanctification, the more you know the source, the more you know God, the more you get more sanctified, and the more you know exactly what to overcome. Are you going to overcome porno? Are you going to overcome smoking habits? Are you going to overcome overeating, gluttony? What are you overcoming? And then, yeah, that makes sense for the next life. But what about building riches in the kingdom? Doing it all now for a reward in heaven. And that goes back to Egypt and the Egyptian days. Everything is about the afterlife. It's not so much the now life. It's about, and this is how you get communities, and this is how you get givers, and this is how you get giving and sharing. And it all just goes back to overcoming. You're right. I think, Jonathan, you were like, if one person can overcome certain things, all of us are going to be better at it. It would make sense as a cascade. If there's a morphic resonant field for just humans, then that makes sense.
Well, that's what is actually happening, because what you see is if someone achieves something that everybody thinks is difficult, like you've got to run the 4-minute mile, until someone actually ran the 4-minute mile in a 4-minute period, it was very difficult to achieve it. But after someone had achieved the 4-minute mile, a whole bunch of people were able to run the 4 minutes.
Oh, see, now we're getting into the TikTok conversation that Buddy brought up earlier.
So
but just the antithesis thereof. It's just the opposite side of that. It really is.
So what you see is people see something that is achieved that everybody thought was difficult. Suddenly it's been achieved, and then people come to the belief that they can achieve it. And
Right.
They achieve it.
And it's
so
the negativity, I think, that's associated with negative things that have been pushed upon the society so heavily for so long, instead of the opposite end, which is the more positive, more uplifting, more gracious, all of these other kind of lessons and things that have not been pushed on society. We've been tick-tocking and all these other things in a negative way instead of a positive way.
And then the inversion of the good and calling it bad, like constantly, even throughout the Bible, even throughout scriptures, taking the good and calling it bad and calling the bad good, and then you're confused. You're like, wait, is Lucifer Jesus? Is Jesus Lucifer? Is Lucifer Venus? Is the light bad?
Saturn,
Why is
Saturn? Where Saturn get involved in this? You know?
Nietzsche actually talked about this, and he described the phases of things. He described the former day of the law, the latter day of the law, and now we're in the age of the unlaw. And these were his description, based upon Buddhistic history, was of the periods of time when people had actually heard and understood the words of Buddha versus the time when you needed monasteries versus the time when everybody was too ignorant and illiterate so they were lucky if they could meet a sage on the road. And then finally now in the age of the unlaw. Now what's interesting is it's come to pass, both the Buddhistic law and the Christian law have met here in America. They have gone east and gone west, and they have come to their upending. And then we had the Holocaust, and then after the Holocaust, the Love is Watching. By the way, buddy, you got another nod in this paper. Love is Watching did.
Thank you.
The thing that happened, which, again, if the system didn't love us, it wouldn't have happened, is in 1947, they dug up the Book of Thomas along with a bunch of other Gnostic Christian texts. And the unique thing about the Book of Thomas, of course, is nothing but the sayings of Jesus. It's just straight bullet points.
Ooh, did y'all guys see the Queen's ceremony yesterday where the station BBC cut out right as one of the speakers started to quote from the Book of Thomas? They cut it out.
That's the point, is that the system fights to keep us from receiving this information, whereas the universe is constantly trying to provide the information. And so in the age of the unlaw, the enlightenment is only one part of the age of the unlaw. The religious topsy-turvy, the family topsy-turvy, the gender topsy-turvy, the legal topsy-turvy, where, if you defend yourself, like the young man, what was his name? He went on trial. He was 17, and he was clearly in self-defense, but they put him on trial. But then we buried George Floyd in a golden coffin, and then heaven decided to strike down his mural with a lightning bolt. So the age of the unlaw is characteristic of the need to find true source teachings and get right directly to the equation. And it's a life equation, unlike what dark side is searching for, the anti-life equation. It's a life equation. Now, to understand it, you have to understand the first 6 worlds from the Vedic texts. The 4 bottom ones are all hells. And then the 5th world is a tranquil world, and the 6th world is heaven. But there's lots of heavens, but it's just generally thought of as psychological happiness. So it just depends on the level. But they did mean, in the old Vedas, they meant actual levels of heavens, different heavens. The Buddhists introduced then the top 4, the first one being the voice hearers. So these are people who go through life and they realize that life is about the afterlife and preparing for the afterlife. And so they conceive a desire to either be saved or enlightened or liberated. So anybody on the 7th vehicle would be a person who has conceived a desire to be enlightened, to be saved, or to be liberated. Okay, and the 3 different things. Those are 3 different flavors. The 8th world consists of those who find self-fulfillment, self-enlightenment, and those are called the arhats or arahants. And they are considered by the Mahayans to be self-important, but also achievers. They're usually monks, mendicants, people who live ascetics. So these are people who are on the eighth vehicle. The ninth vehicle is the bodhisattvas. So anybody who studies or anybody who teaches another person, and specifically in the Lotus Sutra, it says, just like in the concept of the fishers of men, a person who teaches others how to teach then goes from a bodhisattva to a mahasattva, and a maha means great. So Gandhi would be a mahasattva. And so then that's the ninth vehicle, and then the 10th vehicle being the Buddha vehicle directly. And
What
so
about Michael Jackson?
Who?
Michael Jackson, what would he be?
He would still be the person. He'd be a person trapped in the lower four hells. And
Sorry,
so,
I just had to throw that in there.
now here's the interesting thing about the Mahayana Buddhism. It's a thing called the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. The 10 worlds each contain the other 10 worlds. So there you get your first 100. And then in each of those worlds contains the 10 factors. And each of those, now you're up to 1,000. And each of those, there's the samsara, the threefold experience. So now you end up with 3,000. So 3,000 moments in 3,000 worlds in a single moment of life, or 3,000 realms, is the Buddhistic understanding that at any moment you can choose to make a different outcome. And so, although you might be a criminal, you might be Charles Manson, but you can have moments of enlightenment, or you can even choose to stop being Charles Manson and become somebody a completely different level, a completely different sense.
That's your willpower, and willpower is like
willpower. It's willpower. There's a little bit of blessing because of the accumulation of karmic blessings and the elimination of karmic outflows. If you have already served the universe's sentence, then the human sentence doesn't matter. And that's the case of Nelson Mandela. He served his sentence, and then they kept him in prison, and he continued to get benefit. And then he converted all that benefit into becoming the president of apartheid.
I remember him dying in prison vividly as a child.
No, you don't. That's just the Mandela effect.
I swear.
I know.
It's not. I'm telling you, I vividly remember having empathy for the fact that man was put in prison. I remember thinking this while I was in elementary school and hearing that he passed away. I remember physically hearing this and feeling the empathy. I was like, man, I hate that guy, you know what I mean? I can't believe they did that to him. And then he ended up dying.
Well,
I remember having that thought to
I don't want to
myself
get
as a
into
child.
I don't want to get into the 13th floor in the Dark City right now, but I will say that that is the goal in the equation before I go to treat the patient is this: 7 + 8 + 9 = 10. So you can escape, and it's in that draft I shared yesterday. I use the equals MC squared as a thing, each one becoming an infinitely much more energy than the first 6. It's all, of course, on a logarithmic scale. And so study, practice, and teach. Study, practice, teach. Study, practice, teach. Study, practice, teach. And as long as you study, practice, teach, you accumulate little Buddha points, basically, because there's a Buddha in every atom, every moment, every opportunity. And
so
if you study
practice physical on that, though, is it something that's embedded from birth? Is it like a DNA code, so to speak, the genome code?
Yes.
Is it something that's embedded, or is it both? You see,
anybody can start any time. When I come back, I will share a Buddhist allegory for that, but you can start at any moment. What you do, accumulate it.
What I'm going to say is that Mandela, the Mandela that got to prison, did actually commit a crime. He murdered a guy. So maybe that version of Mandela died in prison and a new version was born. But in terms of the Buddha being in every element is no different to the Christian view of God is everywhere in presence, omnipresence. And what we're saying, my speculation is the material that makes up the basis of the universe, the ether, at its basis level, has the capacity to transform any structure which it is used to compose. So everything, atoms, people, stellar systems, whatever, animals, whatever you like to think of, has the capacity to touch the actual underlying structure of the universe and move in the direction that the universe desires to promote life and growth and the rest of it. Or you can reject it. And if you reject it, you're just going to make things worse for yourself.
And I was
you
just,
end
my
up in
question is, goes to the physical aspects of a human individual coming into the realm. Do they have parameters that are predetermined from birth that allow them the physical capabilities of doing that at a greater level versus not?
Well, I think they are. I think they
Well,
are. I think
that's how they choose the Dalai Lama. They choose the Dalai Lama based off of their a baby being born and how they act. So
but the simple, there are people out there that claim that we work out what our life story is going to be, the parameters of it, for the lessons we need to learn in this cycle of existence. And that idea was in Judaism as well as the Eastern religions, and to some degree it was in Christianity, but it's been squashed out.
It's called sanctification in Christianity, and you grow higher and higher and higher, but you don't have to have another life cycle to do it. You can do it
one shot of
life
type
cycle.
thing.
Yeah.
You can do it in a single life cycle, but Buddhism says the same thing. If you knuckle under and really apply yourself in the correct way, and Buddha himself reckoned he did it the wrong way, you can still achieve the necessary growth to make it a one-shot event.
I mean, even Jesus didn't do it. Even Jesus didn't do it in one cycle. He's promised to come back, right? That means he couldn't do it all in one cycle, and that's like one of the highest forms of beings that we understand.
But you got in the Jewish tradition, you got Enoch, and then Elijah, then Jesus, and then whoever's coming. But is that the entire history of all the people that were involved? Is it the same person, the same spirit coming back?
No, I don't think it's all Melchizedek. I don't think it's all Melchizedek the whole way, but there is an order. There's an order, and Jesus is in an order. He's in an order of Melchizedek, and some people think there's Melchizedeks walking the earth right now. I've been told by 32nd degree Freemasons that I'm a modern day Metatron walking on Earth, the Mercury, and God's messenger.
And honestly, buddy, I do think that this TikTok and Twitter and Instagram and all of these different social media applications are all combining together to do exactly what you're saying, but it's doing it in a way that's the 23andMe type concept. It's weeding out and compartmentalizing and echo chambering individuals that fit into the category you're describing there. That's what I truly think is taking place with this TikTok and social media stuff. It's weeding out the individuals that have come into this world, into this existence, into this realm with just even the basic ability to understand the concepts we're talking about, not much less add to it and help grow themselves, but just basically understand. It's been utilized to basically 23andMe all of these people. That's what I think.
Well, it's being used to promote growth and improvement, and it's being used to institute control. Both sides of the fight, the argument between light and dark, both sides are using the same mechanism for different purpose.
Yeah, I could see that. Definitely see that. I think the 23andMe concept, I think compartmentalizing people is really just to find or to discover or to recognize individuals that have, like I said, the capabilities to understand these things. And then you have that next step, which is where they take it themselves. Where do they go? What like, for, Buddy's example of, he's got himself a paper and website and YouTube, the Thunderbolts guys, Ramon's doing great. Everybody's doing their thing. based upon these different levels of understanding. And I think that's the light part of it, you know, the golden path part of it. And then you've got the others, which is the negative path, which are using it to, you know, share things about the Kardashians, or, you know, to show their bodies off, or to promote their OnlyFans site, and to get into the negative aspects of it. But I do think that there is a lot to it, to be honest. And anyway, that's just my thoughts on it.
I think it's all about theft. That's one thing no one can ever forgive. So, for instance, you look at Mandela, he committed a crime of murder. But what was the intent, etc., etc.? But he never stole anything. He never... So if you go down adultery, everything like that, it's all a form of theft. And I think the word is theft that we're looking for. So if you
Maybe
can
so,
keep
yeah.
out of that realm, and if you look at social media especially, that encourages people to feed other people's ideas, etc., etc. You know, so that's just my take.
Well, it's effectively, you've got two choices. You can either go against corruption, you know, purification, or you can become corrupted. That's the choice.
Yep. And that's what,
So,
when I listen to, what I've listened to in this discussion so far, with everything, geez, it's been around the world a few times, it all comes down to you have to try from the start not to be tempted to basically thieve. And that's just what I see in this now.
Well, I think there's a difference between theft and then standing on the shoulders of giants. I do want to make that distinction. You know, you've got to be able to, like, referencing people's work, giving credit where credit's due, that kind of thing.
That I
there
don't
has
call.
to be a building
I don't
block.
call
There
that
has to be a there has to be a building. Right. Okay. Yeah. There has to be a building upon learned knowledge already. So, like, say, taking something Tesla did before and then creating a device now is not necessarily theft. It's more building upon. So,
No.
yeah, I think there's a difference between the two. But yeah,
correct.
you're right. And even with Mandela, with murder,
Yeah.
he stole every single bit of that other individual's time that left on this planet. He stole that from him, took that from him. So it does kind of in an odd way relate back to theft as well, even just some, you know, like murder.
And I suppose that also what you're just saying comes to intent, right? So if you were to use something that, say, Tesla had worked on all them years ago and now modified, adapted, basically had the same thing, but it gave you, for the want of a better word, a better performance of it. But, well, that's not thieving it, because what you just said, the intent was to make it more usable. Now, and then we come into the discussion now legally with what is copyright. Yeah, I understand where that is and how long should it last.
Yeah, that's a difficult one to. That's like with the patent.
I'm getting back earlier.
Even the patent process, to me, I don't necessarily agree with it either.
Well, the patent process, the patents themselves can be either used to enhance, you know, new development or cripple it. And when a company buys patents, the reason why it's doing it is to ensure that its financial future is guaranteed. Or, you know, getting taken out new.
Yeah, I just go back to guaranteed by who.
Well, you know, I think if patents are owned by an individual, then then that should be effectively for their lifetime. But it's a company. And,
Right. I get all that, and I don't disagree. I think that goes back to Andy's
be,
comment about intent. It's just a matter of who's the enforcer of that, who's the deciding person making the decision on what is or is not a patent, who's the people that are making decisions on, well, this isn't patentable because this other patent over here carries 70 to 80% of what you're saying. You're just saying a little bit differently in a different way. So what board is that? And I think that process is what's corrupt. I think that entire grouping has been politicized, and then they can stall the issuing of patents and everything like that in order to keep technology suppressed just by stalling.
And then they can also come in and tell you that your idea is top secret and you have a gag order. So like if you give your idea to the government, they can quickly just tell you cease and dismiss. You can't cease and dismiss. You can't do anything
because,
with that.
Yeah, and all because they have a different agenda in line.
Right.
And then
with
it
someone
doesn't go
else
along with their agenda.
Yep, with someone else that
already corporation.
Yep, they're with Jeff Bezos or something, and there's big issues with patents.
The government and its supporters that use patents to maintain their controls. That's when it gets corrupted.
I agree, but I definitely agree with what you said earlier. The individual that does have a authentic and unique idea should be able to be cited, referenced, and compensated accordingly for that for the rest of their lives.
We've got a system.
Now you're talking about NFTs. I'm an artist. Okay. Now everything that I create should make money, but that's not the world we live in. The world we live in is everything that I create and push out there. Facebook and the other megla giants tech giants make the money. We're trying to transition into a world where everybody gets paid for their content. The more content you put in, the more money you get. Where it's kind of like that already, but if you're not going viral and you're just producing content all the time, you're not getting any money if you're not going viral. So,
but the big thing though is there.
But buddy,
yeah,
Facebook method.
When you put something on Facebook, under their terms of reference, you've given it to them. They now can claim ownership to it. So the bottom line is, and the bottom line, and what you're saying is correct. People use social media and they're giving to that social media company their work for zilch, whereas I've seen debates whereby if they want to use some data that you posted, they should be compensating you for that. But then that's a whole new argument, because at the end of it, how do you know that it's a value, if you understand it's always a value to somebody. But finding that somebody's a difficult point.
The issue here is that companies like Facebook and YouTube are making money out of advertising based on the popularity of videos. They're using the material produced by persons other to enrich themselves. And that economics model is a false model. But
that's all we've ever done. Has always had a third party receiving benefit from two parties of exchange. An external third party has always received money between, and that's even our
parasite.
Yeah, it's basically a parasitical.
But the thing is that those systems will eventually collapse, and they do collapse. And the problem you've got here is that the environment we live in, that we exist in, is a corrupting environment. A person might say, "Oh, I'm going to go for politics to represent the interests of my region," but the political process corrupts that person's, whatever their moral foundations and ethics were. By the time they're elected, they've been thoroughly corrupted. They're no longer in agreement with their original ethics, and if they're in there for any period of time, they think they're above, ethical review.
it's the Karens. The Karens get into government because they want to tell people what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And then all of a sudden you got nothing but, like, take for example my ex-girlfriend. She is the perfect person to get into politics. Guess what she has a degree in? Political science.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. She's perfect to get into politics. And you know, I recently left her for about a year or so, and talked with her recently, and she's trying to go back to get into politics, and she's just the perfect, like, slit eye, slithering type of snake energy that makes politics and politicians work. She's got it, you know. Like, I keep telling her, no, she knows better. But she knows that actually her snake side, her slit eyes, want to go to it. So
Well,
reptilian.
Maybe that's the reason why the biological system's trying to create an artificial intelligence, because its job is going to be regulate the biological system, stop this sort of behavior in the first place.
Well, if we do have a strong artificial intelligence, and if Ray Kurzweil is correct, and by 2029, I think 2045, we're going to be exponentially smarter. I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, I mean, this AI and everything, AI recognizing itself, and I think it would be like light. That's where I was coming with it. Lucifer, light. Light becoming conscious of itself. It would have godlike properties. It would think that it was God. If we're ignorant enough to think that we're God and we created the whole universe, which is what a lot of the people on the planet currently believe, then AI would be dumb enough to think that it's God. It would have to be flawed. Or Lucifer.
Let's say AI gets
So,
developed.
buddy, what we're going to do is...
If AI was to develop
So, Rob,
itself
buddy.
scientifically, would it want to continue to regulate the biological behavior? Would it want to do that?
Well, that comes
intermediaries.
That comes down to us outsourcing. That comes down to us outsourcing what we believe our problems and issues are instead of dealing with them ourselves. So we'll create some form of artificial something to regulate it for us.
And then the artificial intelligence will create intermediaries to do the same thing for them because they don't want to mess with it no more either.
Yeah. And it just gets corrupted and continues along its way.
I think that if and when we do build strong artificial intelligence or something along those lines, it has to be programmed to be afraid of us, because we're ultimately going to want to destroy it.
Maybe so. Why don't we just forget artificial intelligence? Why don't we forget artificial intelligence and try and sort it out ourselves, within ourselves, or...
Is Ramon, are you still listening? Are you on?
He might be busy at the moment.
He's with the patient.
Yeah, I don't know that he kind of answered the question I was asking a second ago based on the Zipf's law of the external vibrational sounds resonating versus the creating them yourself internally. You know, what the difference would be there for the individual, because you have, you know, the human body. We were talking a second earlier about, you know, the vacuum of the human body, and he was saying the electrical field. You and Buddy, you and him are going back and forth versus the external electrical field versus the internal. And so that goes to me on the so I know the difference myself whenever I feel and hear music outside and what emotions are invoked through that process versus me sitting on the floor and chanting and doing kind of a meditational kind of session. That's two different things. And I don't know scalarly, whatever that word, you know, on a scale, I don't know how to compare the two. But has someone smarter than myself done that in the past? That's the question that I have.
That's why cathedrals were built to amplify sound and to the heavens, because give glory to God by singing. It makes you feel better to sing. It makes you act better. It makes you overall. It brings that. It brings you back to a better place.
If you look at the cathedrals, though, they were made, especially with the pipe organs and the such, to resonate those sounds, not physically have the individuals creating them themselves. So the Buddhist concept of sitting and chanting versus sitting in a cathedral, and going back to using that as an example in Robert's comment earlier, if it doesn't align with the human systems, then biologically it'll eject it, or create things that will destroy that particular parasite, or the thing that's disrupting the biological progression. So is the fact that we don't use the cathedrals like we used to a causality because it wasn't meant to
Singing is a type of controlled breathing, as well as prayer.
That, yeah.
It's a type of controlled breathing which is effective in meditation, probably,
But I think
the
question
is
how is it different, and can we quantify that difference between the internal, versus external, receiving it versus producing it?
Right. Now I could listen to music and I could get excited. I could listen to the neural beats, and I could go into special enchanted places. But it's totally different if I'm making the music myself. It's completely different if I am making the music and singing it myself.
I'm asking the quantifiable difference between the two, and in the aspects of healing.
Well,
can we quantify that?
Yes, I think we can. When we look at these systems, like when we're talking about chanting and cathedrals and all the rest of it, the space enables it to resonate. There's a dual direction mechanism. You've got people are creating those sounds for themselves and for the community, and the structure that they're in is resonating it back to the individual. So it becomes a collegiate effort. And what we've lost with the internet and social media is this collegiate get together for sound propagation, because the claim is in religious environment you sing, you pray twice. But what we don't have in the internet environment is the resonance mechanism that allows growth, manner that social interaction. Yes, there is a social interaction, but it's not anywhere near like what it used to be if you get a group of people in the same room.
Yeah, social media is absolutely anything but social.
Well,
But
if you were to
still get communities.
Tribes used to do this and get high every day. Tribes used to get together, and people still do, and there's a special feeling that you get that is almost more orgasmic than an orgasm. It's very higher dimensional, very fourth, fifth dimensional thinking when you get into a drum circle. You got to know when to pop, when to hit that drum, when to act, and then you start seeing the sounds. I mean, I might be synesthete. I might have synesthesia to where the senses blur into each other, but I seen it, I saw it, and you can feel it. Now, this is something
I agree with that. Yeah.
There's a community that's drawn. When a community is drawn together for holding hands in prayer, or just to come together in Om, and everybody goes Om and holds hands. Have you ever done that? If you have, it's incredible. I did it with the Rainbow Gathering here in the United States. It's a huge gathering where nobody uses cash. It's a cashless society. And every 4th of July, they have tens of thousands of people in the middle of the woods, all feeding each other and living for over a month. Now, this elation that comes with community coming together and singing, that is sympathetic resonance. That's resonance. That's sympathetic vibratory resonance. Because you're not the only one making it, you feel like you're part of a larger system. That's the same with God. because you're not the one making it, you feel like you're part of a larger system.
Right.
You didn't make the worm come up to you. You didn't make the jackal come up to you when you were just in the middle of thinking about your brother who loved jackals and passed away, and now you're the jackal king. And Native American folklore, you're the jackal. What are you? You know, you're the eagle. How do you find your identity? Find your spirit animal. I don't know. It just goes. I could go on and on and on and on with this. How sound is reciprocal and helps you find your purpose and your meaning in the cosmos. Sound, making music and sound with others, is what they took out of the classrooms, and they defunded art and music, which is the two central nodes that bring people into the heavens and community. That's all I gotta say.
No, I appreciate it because people here haven't
Getting
participated.
back to what
Talking or listening hasn't participated in a sweat, then you should, because an authentic sweat experience, sweat lodge experience, is really quite special. And any of those situations where you can experience you don't have to have entheogens, but you know that in general, that transcendental experience, it's super beneficial. There's probably a measurable electrical cause for that, having to do with ions and circulation in the DNA.
The heavy metals
but
during the sweat
bet
process too.
there were measurements done by a scientist, not measurements, but experiments, and he would provide LSD to these Tibetan monks, and they would not notice the difference because their practices, these ancient practices, they would actually create the same similar conditions. And
it's more than a practice. It's more than a ritual. It's a ceremony.
Yes. Okay, I don't know what you're correcting, but what I would say is that it's very beneficial for people, whether you're sick or not, to participate in these collective exercises, as well as, of course, as Jesus said, pray on your own. There's a push and pull where working with the collective consciousness can benefit the individual, and then at some point it can hurt the individual. And working on your own can benefit the individual, or at some point can hurt the individual and make them too remote from society, too remote from the actual practical application of the Tao. And this is something that was talked about by Louis Ming. So the alternation from a collective to an individual experience to experience these same things, these same states, or similar enough, at least frequency-wise.
Is there a limitation, you think? Is there a limitation on the number of individuals, let's say for a community, buddy, you were talking a minute ago, you have X amount of people in a community come together, holding hands and chanting Om, versus, like, let's say, everybody going into a cathedral and listening to pipe organs? I mean, is there a limitation on the number of individuals that this has an efficacy?
I haven't seen that.
There is a number, and it has a name, and I had it written in my last book, and I keep referring to it and keep forgetting about it. It's the number, I think it's 150.
I don't believe that. And I'll tell you why I don't believe it. It's because Billy Graham was going around doing whole stadium fulls of people, and so was Gandhi. Gandhi was giving sermons out to people who were hundreds of thousands of people, and was changing the consciousness of an entire nation. I think the only difference is that scale. Again, going back to the 7 + 8 + 9 is 10. There's a level, there's a ramp up at E = mc squared, where at the end, as you approach the asymptote, which the 10th level is this infinite level where you're wanting to reach the 11, but the 11 is on the other side of the asymptote. And as you ramp up, the exponential increase means an exponential increase in power. And that's the difference between a regular bodhisattva and a mahasattva. I'm a regular bodhisattva, but there's the mahasattvas reach millions and even billions of people, and if they were to lead such an exercise, if the Dalai Lama were to lead such an exercise, and he actually did one of the Tibetan rituals that you're talking about,
it is.
The power of it would be much more intense than if one of us led the exercise. There's a qualitative aspect to that. I don't think that it has a numerical limit as much as a how much energy.
We're talking about different things. So I guess you need to refine your question, Jonathan. The question that I heard in my head is the notion that there exists a cognitive limit on human groups, and yet the number
maybe
Dunbar's number, but I don't know. There's virality. There's different things like Michael Jackson could be thought of as a bodhisattva or something, probably because of how many people he affected. People cried and fell and fainted in his presence. I mean,
Elvis
Jesus
Presley.
is like that. Elvis Presley. It's like, so what really is? What are we actually talking about here? Because Dunbar's number says that there's a max. Okay, right here. The maximum number of relationships a person can maintain is Dunbar's number. Okay, 150. Which
Well, I think
that,
it's a matter to refine my kind of what I was trying to question. It's more a matter of because we have the benefit of social media and mass media. So I want to remove social media from the conversation, but mass media. We have the ability for mass media today. So, Ramon, to your point, Gandhi going around doing his thing was, at the height of the mass media versus somebody like, let's say today, Billy Graham. Billy Graham. I mean, the reason why he was so effective could be argued that, TV broadcast became very, and you had the whole radio and TV was a part of his whole entire ministry.
Same with Alex Jones. Actually, right. He was one of the first people to get into that, the whole podcasting stuff and radio broadcasting and.
Yeah. So, but if we go to the more community level, that 150, if you look at the way that the Native Americans broke out their different communities, was limited to approximately, let's say, 150 or whatever, but it could be more closely related to what Buddy, your number there, based upon the efficiency of the particular medicine man and the matriarchal society that they had at the time.
Yes, actually, that makes perfect sense. It's the capacity of one person. If one person's the cult leader, technically the cult, if he's the only ruler, and unless he has subservient underruling, that can only get to 150. That's why you have to have a council. And that's why the wisest man says it's wise to have council and blah, 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 and yada, yada. And then you get bigger and bigger, and you can handle way more than 150 people in interaction.
It does, I think it makes sense.
I mean, I vend and I all over and I see the same people all the time, the same people. I can't remember all their names. I just can't. And I can't always, I can remember like I know them, but they all know me, because I'm the ice cream man. I'm Buddy, but I can't remember everybody's name. I see them all the time, and it's just like, that's Dunbar's number right there. It's just like, that's my limit. Sorry. Like,
yeah.
But you're also running into scaling mechanisms here, right? There's interactions that are based on a small number. There's interactions that are based on a medium number, and then there's the mass number. And there's different scaling rules. The way the interactions go are very different. Like if you're Billy Graham going around the world, proselytizing people, everybody's going to know you because you're Billy Graham, but you're not going to know everybody else because you're Billy Graham. There's just no way knowing you can remember.
Right. I know 150.
So,
right.
You might know
the issue here is an interaction mechanism based upon scaling. So the smaller the group, the more likely the interaction is going to be two-way. And the larger the group, then it's going to be one-directional, or tend to be one-directional.
Yeah.
I'd really like to map out that scaling. I really would. That'd be nice to map out properly.
Well, we'll tell you that there probably is a whimsical analysis that can be done on the leveraging through media and technology. But if you want the authentic experience, you really want to sense these kinds of things in person. And there are individuals still in this world who do the Qigong to the level where they can not just, there's the guy who can make animals go to sleep, right, from a distance. But there's people who they can actually make an entire room feel one way and then change the entire room over to a different way. And they take advantage of this in multi-level marketing. They take advantage of using music,
And you know what
bring people
you know
up.
what that's called? That's called doublethink, and that's 1984. And Trump was brilliant at it.
Okay, well, I'm talking about a physical experience. I'm not talking about just the mind. I'm talking about that the people physically in the room with the Qigong master. Let's take let's just use Thich Nhat Hanh.
I see what you're saying.
So Thich Nhat Hanh will actually change the voltage behavior of the room, and the people will feel something. And then when you have ever been around one of those kinds of people who can make a change that's bigger than, because I only work with a few individuals at a time, and I could maybe fill up a martial arts studio, something like that. But these people, they can fill up the entire room, and they can fill up quite large rooms, ante rooms, even stadiums.
It's called charisma.
They can. It's not just the Jesus Christ, guys. I'm telling you, when you have been around an authentic person who can do this, and they can project the power out of their hands or out of their being, it is not in your mind. It has nothing to do with charisma. They probably are charismatic people, but if I don't speak Chinese, I'm not going to be affected by their charisma. They're projecting it out, and it's altering the actual field around you. That's what I'm saying. Those types of people still exist because the teaching still exists. They particularly exist very well in Aboriginal societies or in Asiatic societies.
And gangsters and drug dealers.
Maybe so, but you're speaking in the direction where the gravity towards the lower four worlds is very strong because the energy states are very low.
If you have that power over that many amount of people, you start organizing things.
Sure. Pablo Escobar. Yes, I get it. Yeah, Pablo Escobar had a terrible result like that. But I'm not speaking down in the lower four worlds. I'm talking in these upper four worlds. When people really want to transform society in the positive direction, not because they have some selfish need to run a cartel. I mean, these individuals, they have abilities. The most famous one on the internet is John Chang. He's actually deceased now. His Mopai, the video of him lighting the LED and doing things in the medical people with the equipment, and they're measuring him and they're in the room. These videos have not just gone viral, they have sparked innumerable debates among even people in the Qigong circles. Like, was Mopai a legit cult? Was it not a legit cult, etc.? So now John Chang was actually demonstrating this stuff against the desires of some upper power. And he had a dream, and his master came and berated him for showing off the tricks, and he refused to do it ever again. Now he taught, but he wouldn't do any of it on camera anymore. So there was something measured there. It was shown. It was demonstrated. It's been written. There are books. I can point you to books that talk about the system.
Oh, you don't have to convince me. I do it myself. I understand exactly what you're talking about. Like working with the storms, working with the fish, having all of a sudden there's no fish jumping for hours, and then all of a sudden intending the fish to start jumping, and they start jumping. Right. Not even being in the water, not even being on the ground, not having my shoes, or having my shoes on, standing on a picnic table. Like, I mean,
yeah, I've been around you. I've shared. You have a high amount of spirit chi. You have a lot of spirit chi.
We can do. Yeah, I believe you, and I want to hear more examples. Please tell us more.
These individuals are often known as superhuman, and there are recorded examples of these superhumans, and supposedly even some who acquired what was called the rainbow body, and were able to liquefy stone, etc. I don't know. I wasn't there. Bodhidharma was one of the famous examples of a superhuman. And I don't just mean that they had Samson-like strength, but although there is a ESPN 30 for 30 about a man who was the greatest that never was, I think is the name of the episode. He had Samson-like strength, And it's an interesting episode because essentially his destiny to be the greatest fullback in the history of the NFL was robbed by a series of bad choices that were caused by the influence of his uncle and a bad preacher. And they took the check from his first and only game in the USFL, and they spent it. He knew he was going to get injured. The spirit basically told him. He goes into the football game, gets blown out his knee, just totally destroyed. And now he's just a normal forklift driver. And when you look at him, you can tell that there's a feeling that you don't get. Before that, he felt like Bo Jackson or Michael Jordan or Mike Tyson. And after that, like in the interview, he just seems like a normal dude. So there's something qualitative, etheric about it.
Christian Okoye, the running back for Kansas City Chiefs, always comes to mind when talking about this kind of stuff. He was never played organized sports of any kind except football, being soccer. Played soccer, but then went to the U.S. and
well, those cases exist. Imagine those that are like designed, like engineered. So if you want to read Taoist Master Zhuang by Michael Sassow, he actually followed this guy around. And there's a very, very infamous scene where they're sitting around. The Taoist master likes him because his son is not going to take up the Taoist tradition. And here Michael Sassow is, he's a white guy, but he's interested and he's willing to learn and he's willing to listen. And so he basically was letting him live there with him. And so they're all sitting around drinking. Under Zhuang's habit was to be alcoholic. And suddenly someone bursts in the door and says, your rival, whatever his rival's name is, your rival is busy practicing XYZ magic. And he jumps up and he runs out the door. He doesn't let anybody go with him. Then about an hour later, they're sitting at the table wondering how it's going. A man bursts in the door and the man is sizzling. Like there's actual smoke coming off of him. And he says, "Tell Master Zhuang I'll never do it again." And then leaves without a word. And then another hour later, Master Zhuang walks in, half drunk already, celebrating because he'd fried his rival. Now, Master Zhuang was only a grade 3 out of 7 grades of Taoist Master. Only a grade 3.
So, Ramon, let's go back a bit to the number where you're talking the likes of Billy Graham and some of those people. You'd probably find their group grew to 150 people that they had close, that they could interact closely with.
Yeah.
Everybody else that was, say, the billions, the masses, whatever medium they were using to communicate with, right? That was all additional to that. So you'd probably be right, buddy, in that within your life, you've got 150 people that are on the same similar type that you interact with because that's what you're sourced to. And then along your life, you move through life, that one might drop off, someone else picks up. But you're probably right, at any one given time, the maximum you could have is possibly 150, and you'd probably also find that came initiated from a group that was originally grew to somewhere around 25. And then from there, it continued. So like I've always worked on for a long time, I've realised somewhere around that 18 to 25, that can be very, very closely knit. And you've got to remember too that within that 150, they're not all there for, as an example, for you. Some of them are there because they may also have other motives, right? But along the journey, you work that out and you just sort of keep them maybe, or you or you discard them. You know, so that's just my take on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's an actual science. We have to look into Dunbar's number more, but it sounds interesting. I mean, it's some sort of a science, right? They did some sort of test.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a way to quantify it in some aspects to a degree
Honestly,
or another. You know,
honestly,
at the same time. Sorry, go ahead.
I had to say this earlier. Sorry to interrupt you, but there is a way, and I 100% believe it's already done, and it's in the book Scale by Jeffrey West. We need to start communicating with Jeffrey West. I got to reach out to him.
Yeah, I definitely, to Andy's point, don't want to, in a minute, let us all not take this group in particular for granted and the aspects of what we're all talking about as far as the energy and the et cetera.
No, I love watching this group fight. People before there was like a lot of, I mean, not necessarily fight, but like go head and head against different ideas. You know, it's not always about agreeing about. You don't want an echo chamber of us just agreeing. We want people to break it up. You know, break up the drum beat.
The discussion has to be able to evolve, move out, come back as required. And yeah, look, obviously this group, we could have some pretty good discussions, but there's no one there doing the typical, it's not my way, get nasty at people. They say what their views are and move on. And that's what I like about it. That's probably pretty unique in a way. The other thing I'd like to ask is, so when Ramon was talking earlier with the measuring the voltage and that, and maybe measuring voltage wasn't the only, there's other measures. If you look at, say, biologically, the human body, is it quite capable that we haven't really found the real links yet? Because it's possible that a biological body has the ability to actually maintain, repair, rebuild, and continue. So that would come back to, do we die because we of this spirit form, or is it that we haven't yet developed where we can live, or is it that we have to physically die in the form we're in to create the next
iteration.
Rebirth?
I think it goes down to whether or not you're able to carry
every one
on.
of us live. Yeah.
If you're able to carry on the learned knowledge or the unlocked potential of each individual, if you're able to carry that on to the next level or not, 7 plus 8 plus 9 equals to 10, are you able to carry that on to the next level or not? And I think that determines, or is determined by the individual's lifespan. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know for sure, but I've had personal experiences in my life where I know of individuals that have gotten to a certain place spiritually that have then just been removed from either my life or this world in general. And so I think personally, it comes down to, once an individual has achieved their mission, I don't want to say if it's a mission or not, but achieved the certain goal set out by the universe, then the body says, okay, that's enough. You know,
that's going to be a hard memsical approach, because differentiating between a person's fate and their destiny is really difficult. Really difficult.
That's
I agree
for sure. That's a hard philosophical argument to lay down.
It is. I know.
It's hard it's hard enough to philosophically define it. Now you want to technologically define it. It's kind of funny because what you're proposing, I was just writing the test proposal, which I will read now, the hypothesis that I've decided upon, and then the test proposal. The author proposes, based on the above three aspects of the hypothesis, that team taken as a whole of anything that grooves into the individual on a mind, body, and spirit level is capable of penetrating into the DNA, particularly non-coded DNA, but possibly not limited to the non-coded. More to the point, the events of one's life, particularly traumatic but not limited to events through emotions and thoughts, are potentially recorded into the DNA. Test proposal. The author therefore proposes that technology is developed, or if already developed and utilized, to track in conjunction with machine learning or other data analytics to find and compare repetitious events that are easily identified chronologically, such as a car wreck or a murder, with defined trauma boundaries, since emotions and thoughts are not bounded in time, with before and after measurements in the DNA, to the precision necessary to see genetic and epigenetic changes and or mutations. I mean, it's not easy to go from what we're talking about to a scientific endeavor. It's not easy. And the money also, I mean, that's a huge issue. It's like, when will this proposal actually be taken up? It could take another 1,000 years at the rate that humanity is currently behaving in the age of the unlaw. You know, the Maitreya, there's some argument whether the Maitreya is supposed to return in 1,000 years or 100,000 years. It depends on the sutra you read.
Yeah, well, that's another thing that seems pretty universal, is that everyone's waiting for their savior, their particular savior, whether it's the you know, we've talked about this a million times. Scientologists are waiting for the aliens to come. The Raelians are waiting for the aliens. This is just the beginning of. I mean, this is just the beginning of these religions. Rael and Raelians, and they were the first people to clone a sheep, or at least get the credit for it. And that's crazy, batshit crazy. When you start researching all that stuff, and it's like, how did they get the media hype to get the credit for claiming the first, cloning the first? And then you find out that they're a cult, and you can go join this cult, and everyone's just like worshiping Rael. And it's like, this guy said he had an experience and went up with the aliens and met with Buddha and Jesus, and he said he's meant to be the messenger to prepare the way for the aliens to come back. So I think every religion has their, you know, the Christians are waiting for the second coming of Christ. Jews are waiting for the first coming of Christ. You got the Muslims waiting for the 12th Mahdi. It just keeps going on and on and on and on. And the Buddhists are waiting for the Maitreya.
I think it's a case
Hey, Greg.
when an idea, time arrives. So, you know, you're going to see things change when it's time for that change to happen. It's almost like it's a critical mass has got to occur. And the critical mass may be in the approach to thinking or some other sort of behavior. When that event occurs, then things take off in the direction that's either be really good or really bad.
Yeah, I think that again goes to my comment earlier about this particular group, at least as far as my feelings towards it. This particular group here, we wouldn't have ever had, or even or 5 years ago, I don't think. And I think that there's something to be said for that. In fact, it's just a mass, you know, critical mass. The environment with which we are now subjected to has reached, I think, a critical mass of either one or two things, either going towards decline and continuing down a rate of decline, epigenetically, physically, everything, just through a decline, or going being elevated and going towards a movement of a higher level.
The suggestion of the use of the E equals MC squared to describe the 10 worlds theory of the Buddhists would imply that in order to maintain energetic balance, that if you have large numbers of people inhabiting the lower 6 realms, you're also going to require a simultaneous increase in either the number of people or the quality of people inhabiting the upper 4 realms in order to balance it out. Right, energetically.
I could see that. I think, but
I
as an
think the
integration.
individuals projecting light have a higher effect on a higher number of individuals than the individuals projecting the lower side. That's just my
Well, yeah,
thought
yeah.
Well,
process
check.
on it.
But cumulatively,
Let's
let me finish my
go ahead.
thought there, because I forgot to mention.
All right.
What I'm saying is it's a reaction to the mass formation psychosis. It is the sudden rise in the number of what the Buddhists call the bodhisattvas of the earth. And there's a particular chapter in the Lotus Sutra where the literal bodhisattvas appear out of the ground, and the bodhisattvas, the actual historical bodhisattvas of the Buddha, ask, where did they come from? And he says that there are countless, boundless, Nayuta Samkhyas of bodhisattvas that exist, and they've just been waiting for the moment to arrive. And in the story, the treasure tower physically appears, which is probably why the Nichiren Buddhists use the Butsudan. But the treasure tower, of course, is metaphorical. And in the treasure tower is Many Treasures Buddha. And Many Treasures Buddha then invites the Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, to sit with him. And he's much bigger than the Shakyamuni Buddha. And you almost could pat him on the head, but they don't do that, obviously. And the bodhisattvas, the living bodhisattvas, the ones of the time, are disbelieving. And in one of the scenes, the dragon daughter turns instantly into a Buddha, implying non-humans can become Buddhas and women can become Buddhas, and fantastical things have Buddhist properties in them. That the single flavor of the entire, what Nichiren called the universal salty flavor, was just waiting to be tapped into and expressed. And perhaps the bodhisattvas of the earth are emerging, the indigo children, as they say.
Well, Walter Russell calls it inspired messengers. Messengers of God. The Bible calls it the elect. We've always had these people on the earth, and the elect aren't necessarily the people that are running the politics. What we modern day call the elect or the elite.
Agree with that. That's a true statement there.
It's far from that. It's on the opposite end of the spectrum. Where some, you were talking about the greatest man who ever lived. None of us would know the greatest man who ever lived because he would have been so humble. Everything would have been just like we wouldn't have even known about it. That's what I've heard.
Maybe so, but is that true? I mean, yeah, but would that be true if, universally,
you don't want to be remembered. You want to be so humble that you did all your deeds and no one even knew you were here, kind of idea,
But then why at the top of what Ramon was just expressing, why at the top of that ladder for the Buddhist is the treasure?
The treasurer? My dad's the treasurer with where he's working. That's funny. What?
Well, yeah, I mean, like if at the top of the Buddhist chain, you're looking, they're saying that, once you get to that's the treasure, you get to the treasure chest, you reach the treasure chest or what have you. He was explaining that, and I'm not doing it justice at all. But why? Yeah, well, because that seems like an external personal goal. You're trying to achieve something for yourself only, and which is fine. That's a selfish motivation. But the motivation is to achieve a certain treasure, versus being able to, bring other individuals to a certain level in humanity, or to do something that's almost altruistic in nature.
Well, let's take, for example, I know the ramifications of the Dougherty set are going to be all sorts of craziness, no matter where and what directions it is, and where it takes us in the Theodorian roots. So let's take, for example, someone wants to make a religion out of me after I die. And where does the idea of that person coming back, or something in that religion having hope for a savior, why does every religion do that? And if after I die, would someone think I'm coming back? Like what is the I'll be back of the Arnold Schwarzenegger that makes us so interested? And where, like the 12th Mahdi, who was the first Mahdi, and why does the Mahdi come back? Like Indras, different Indras of gods, cycles of gods. Is it just Is it just showing more the cyclicity of the universe and birkeland currents in the Dougherty set? Is it just is you know, Indra's net the Dougherty set?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
It could be something as simple as, you know, the universe has that need, and individuals know their limitations based upon the parameters coming into the manifestation of this world. They already have a certain set. Like, you just know, you know, I think you said it earlier. You just know certain things about, you know, what you're doing here, or what's right and what's wrong, or whatever. But people
that are fulfilled with purpose. Like,
right. So, but the purpose in a lot of individuals, for the majority, know that their purpose is not to be that level of individual. So they do look for an external person to guide or be the leader
Sure.
of the group. Yeah, the teacher.
Sure.
So the hope of that person coming back, or coming back in a manifestation of this world, or at least the personification of that person coming back into this world, is probably what drives what you're asking there, I think.
Yeah, it's like an absence. It's filling the void after they're gone is what it is, dude. The absence is so crushing that people would rather believe that they're coming back, or already here, or might even hallucinate that they're there, because they can't even believe that they're gone. You know, imagine the trauma. You know, the trauma of losing a loved one, right? Now imagine the trauma of losing someone that you worshipped. That person would come back to you, you know, like Jesus came back to the 12 apostles.
Yeah, but see, is that a causality of our inability to observe and interact on a regular basis with the higher level of dimensions, or say spirit world, or etc.? Or is that what that is? Because if we were to be able to interact fully with other dimensional beings, then necessarily that desire wouldn't be here in this 3D realm, would it?
I think most people that start interacting with three-dimensional beings and the spirits in the spirit world, there's something that happens to them, whether it's a self-centeredness and only I can communicate with the spirit, and then like only I can make the rules, and I can only channel Metatron, or this is only happening because I'm here and but it makes a lot of sense, because a person who does reach those certain levels can communicate with weird things, but those spirits are dangerous, and oftentimes it makes people messed up.
Right, and that's, I think, honestly, that
delusional.
Reason, I think, because this world is so driven, like Robert mentioned earlier, by the
spiritual world.
Right. Well, this world here that we live in now is currently being driven by greed and the politicians in place.
I do have two stories that will.
I'm just saying might be a reason. It might be an effect of an individual that has the ability to communicate properly, but then they're affected by the material.
It could be very well. So let me share two stories. One is when I was talking about earlier, people that project. A story that comes to mind. Do you remember the show, the Ripley's Believe It or Not show that actually went on TV?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember the Chinese man who could walk on jars with like thin paper, and he'd do all these tricks and stuff?
Yeah, but I was always on the or not side. I just didn't believe any of it.
Anyway,
no,
so
I'm just kidding.
So he actually. It's interesting. I actually went to one of his shows or presentations in Southern California. This man had survived like 20-something years in the communist camp in China, got out and came to America. He actually did have abilities. I would rank him as probably like a 7.2 out of 10.
On the what scale? On the what scale?
Out of 10. Out of 10.
On the what scale, though?
Out of 10.
What's the name of the scale? I want to know. If it's not named, we should name the scale. What scale are you referring to?
I would say we'll just call it the ability scale. Okay. So at any rate, his abilities were very real, But he also did what is known as street magic in our culture. In China, it is completely normal and part of tradition for a kung fu master to perform sleight of hand, illusionism, those kinds of things that are based in like regular Newtonian physics, like knives and like, cutting at the belly, bending and breaking spears. All of that stuff
basically
is
busking, right? Street performing, busking.
I don't know, but in China, it's just a thing that kung fu guys did when they were poor. They would street perform and receive,
That's
coins.
what I was waiting for. That's what I was waiting for. Is because of the material.
Okay.
Material needs.
You guys want to hear the story or no?
My bad, man. My bad.
I haven't even finished the setup. Christ almighty. So the guy is a very nice man. He's not a charlatan, but this is normal in Chinese culture. This is what you do. But he is surrounded by people who pump him up because he's been on Ripley's Believe It or Not. Could he actually catch the paper on fire with his chi? Don't know, because it could have had chemistry in it. It could have not. I didn't get this chance to smell the paper beforehand. I did go up. So he actually, you could feel him 20 feet away, though. He could project the chi 20 feet away. I went up and I talked to him. He had nice, soft hands. He had the requisite things that a Qigong master would have. So he was a legit master, but he never gave me the impression he was huge. But I tell you, the audience effect, those people were gyrating. I saw men who looked like they wanted to have his babies. Okay, these people were out going bonkers. Now, they're Southern Californian. That might count for something. But they were absolutely losing their minds. It's like they weren't familiar with the fact that these things are common in Chinese Kung Fu history. And so the effect on their mind, there's what Buddy was talking about, power of suggestion. These people thought he was some kind of Maitreya. He himself was just being a Chinese Kung Fu master who performed some street magic, and he does have unique Qi Gong level of skill, but he is nowhere near Master Zhuang, who I was talking about.
I was thinking,
he's
real quick, I was thinking of David Blaine earlier. I'm glad this came up because he actually does have some pretty good abilities and a lot of practice. But keep going, please.
Yes, no. David Blaine's a great example of that exact kind of phenomenon. And Hollywood has been able to leverage that and create something. But I wouldn't put this
America's Got Talent.
Yeah, I would put him on America's Got Talent. I wouldn't put him on Stanley's Superhumans. The people who are on Stanley's Superhuman show, those people really are super intense. This guy, I mean, he was just a very well practiced. He obviously performed his song every day. He had gone through something, and through that dark night of the soul, he had acquired a new level. But otherwise, he was normal. What was abnormal was the reaction of the audience was out of proportion to the reality. Now, the other story, quickly, is...
Can I ask about that question real quick, Ramon? Can I ask about that one real quick?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So if in the audience you have individuals that are at a lower state of understanding or lower state of, let's say, unlocking of certain potentials, and then they witness something that is at such a high state that causes them physically to automatically go from, let's say 2 at the scale to jump to, instead of going through their own personal dark night of the soul and experiencing these things, they're shown it, and then it causes them to jump levels. Could that have that physical effect that you're talking about there? I mean, not saying they're jumping high levels, they're just jumping from 2 to 4.
Yes.
That they missed 3, so that physical reaction is what you're witnessing there in the audience.
Yes, because they're starved. And if they're starved of authenticity and they encounter even the smallest amount of it, it sends them through the roof.
I got it.
And, the Grandmaster Sente and Bruce Lee were people who were of high to medium-high skill in Kung Fu alone. Sente had some unique abilities, but the effect upon people in America was very profound, and that was even back in the 60s. Now people have been so plasticized and so internet, everything is McYoga, McDojo, that they really don't experience authenticity often enough. So frankly, you could have a guy who just spray tans. And there's a documentary where a guy pretends to be a Hindu guru, and the people fall for it 100%. All he did was talk like his grandma. And people fall for this stuff because they're starving for real spiritual depth. That's where we need to fill the gap if we can use the electrocosmology. Now, the answer to the person touching things and it corrupting them, yes. The name of the guy you can look up, who Michael Sassow, I have spoken to Michael Sassow, he knows Jerry Allen Johnson. Jerry Allen Johnson has deep texts. If you want to know authentic information, get Jerry Allen Johnson's books, because the man was getting the Celestial Masters drunk and stealing it from them and putting it into the texts. Now, Michael Sassow says that some of the...
How do you get the Celestial Masters? How do you get the Celestial Masters drunk?
Well, you just go drinking with them. Taoists are well known for drinking. The Celestial Masters were also capable. They're perfectly allowed to get married and be normal guys.
Oh, I didn't know Celestial Masters were a real thing. I thought you meant like.
Well, that's one of the sad things
like
about the situation is that the Celestial Masters is the oldest religious Taoist order in history. It goes back to well before the Holy Roman Empire. The Celestial Masters have been around a long, long time. They're extremely legit. So, he had access. So he's a white guy who made it. He started with Kung Fu, then Bagua and Tai Chi, and his Bagua and Tai Chi. Then he studied medical Qigong, and then they trusted him and they let him in. And then he got greedy and he started doing things. And the guy who bought his house and moved into that house told me that he felt very strongly that Jerry Allen Johnson had actually done some human sacrifice in order to gain more powers. And so the dark side had tempted him. Now, I met an aspect of Jerry Allen Johnson in astral, and he was quite rude. I wouldn't say I saw anything overtly evil, but he was not pleasant. And it's a really sad thing because he's the guy who made it. Whites have not traditionally been let into the inner circle. And here he was let into the inner circle, and he appears to have fallen to the dark side because, I don't know, the natives all think that whites have something wrong with them. And so maybe we do.
Of course. Dude, it's the white Satan, man. Colonialism, period.
Yeah, well, it might be that. It might be there's just the Koyaanisqatsi. And there is something to the life out of balance concept. And that whole trilogy is really interesting. Koyaanisqatsi, Powasqatsi, and Nausqatsi. But at any rate, I have no idea if there was something out of balance with him. His medical Qigong books are expensive, but they're very authentic. I can be glad to give anybody access to one of the PDFs or something if they really want to study it. It's deep, deep shit. You'll be wading into heavy, heavy waters. But it's just really sad that he touched he got access to the spirit world. He was part of the Thunder cult and then fell. And I myself was invited into the Thunder cults and did not join it, and that's how I ended up with you guys. Not putting you down or anything. I'm just saying that God was like, okay, if you're not gonna swallow this pill and go down the path of thunder magic, then here's what we're gonna do. Here's these thunderbolts, guys. And that's how I ended up in this path. Is that at that crossroads, God he was like, oh, well, you didn't do that, so here's this. And I'm very happy with the results because while Master Josh Painter. He understands the stuff because of his Sami background and his Chinese ancestry, and he's able to write the runes and stuff. I know where they came from. I know the plasma glyphics and all this kind of stuff that he doesn't have as much access to. And he admitted that. The Sami people, 3,000 years of tradition, but they just talk about the cataclysms. They don't know what happened. They just talk about it, And so it's interesting. It's interesting, nevertheless. But yeah, if you touch, Buddy's right. These things are dangerous, and if you touch them and you don't have the grounding and centering, many psychics have gone insane. And I can tell you lots of stories like that. Be right back.
Dang, that was a good answer.
I think yes. When you start to unlock a lot of esoteric things, you've got to be very careful how you use it, because there are energies at work that can kind of hook on. They seem to hook on to these people who are dabbling in places where they shouldn't be, really. Almost like entities, egregores, kind of kind of go with these sort of thought patterns. And those people who have thought patterns get the visitations off the same kind of entities, and they're not pleasant ones at all.
I could see that. I think there's, and also variations as far as whether it's a lustful type motivation for the individual, it's a materialistically, they want to be, materialistically advanced, or they want to have power and control.
Well,
So I think
all
the
these
divisions there as
human
well.
conditions were expressed in form of demons at one point. They were all kind of almost semi-alive entities, egregores, and they, if there was a kind of a sniff of that, what they represented around in the atmosphere, they were likely to appear at some point or manifest again in some way, in some particular way, with the person who summoned them. And you see the thought processes that someone like, for example, Alistair Crowley was doing. That he wanted to. He believed that in order to understand anything, you had to experience it in its full range of conditions. So, for example, you might want to eat a beautiful plate of cherries, but then to enjoy that, he maintained, first you've got to eat a pile of dog shit. So and he was an extremely intelligent guy, Crowley, but of course his practices became more and more extreme as he sought whatever he sought after. He kind of destroyed the lives of everyone he'd been near.
Well, I take that akin to the kind of what we've experienced in today's world, where drugs stop losing their ability to the tolerance level in a human being. So you have, let's say, you have to take one pill today, two pills tomorrow, three pills the next day in order to have the same physical effect. It might be that's the same way on the spiritual side of things, that this communication and the summonings and all of this crap these people are doing, that it might be that after a while, it just doing what you did yesterday doesn't have the same effect. You have to go further, and you have to go further, and up to the point where you get to human sacrifices is what you have to do in order to bring back and summon that individual, because the entities demand a higher level of, etc. Maybe I'm just throwing.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track with that sort of thing. It's certainly I think what John D, again, getting back to him, he was trying to interact with these particular entities.
Yeah, and I think your requirements just become more in order to interact with them on a regular. You just have to eat more shit in order to have more cherries.
Yeah, I think that's what kind of happens. So I think that even if you sense you've got these kind of energies and powers in yourself, be very careful, how you employ them. Is all I'm saying. Because we can, of course, we do project light as human beings, and I'm wondering if this is connected. Well, this biosphere that surrounds us, what shape is it? Is it the shape that we grow into from babies into like a tree? Does that grow into its energetic form that surrounds it? Is that the same case with a human being? Do we emit more light when we're happy or elated, or when we have some specific brainwave function? What and what does it mean when we are emitting light? Can other people sense that light? I'm pretty sure they can, really. But but yeah, I mean, is that where the thought's contained in that bioenergetic field that surrounds a human being?
It is.
Yeah,
I think it is, and I think that people can and do feel that light, and that's what we're talking about, and that's biophotons. and there's a science to it.
And a way to quantify it in some level.
And after buying this this kit that I have, by the way, it healed me. It helped me heal extremely fast. I used it after I had a bad accident, bicycle accident. It was actually a tricycle, an e-bike. Anyway, researching this stuff, I'm realizing that this biofield is the same thing that people got healed from Jesus when they touched him, even his garments. But this is also getting into the belief. Yeah, this is also getting into the belief that.
Buddy,
that
I'm literally copying Matthew 14:36 as you said that, and they implored him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak, and as many as touched it were cured. I was literally copying that when you said that.
Dang.
Yeah, and this is all real. This happened to me a few times. This is a visceral, real gut feeling. It happens inside your body. It changes you completely into a different person. My latest transfiguration was the only thing that I would have called any of my transfiguration, and that was absolutely incredible. But it was actually just Kundalini and getting all and like literally becoming a supernova together with another person that you just met, and no kissing, no fornication, just holding each other, and just bow, boom, gone. And
guys,
then
I'm sorry, I've got to jump off. I apologize, guys. I've got to jump off. I've got somebody beating on my door here. I've got to get out off the phone, but it's been a great conversation. I'm sorry to cut you off there, buddy. I got to jump off. Just wanted to say goodbye and thank you so much, guys, for the call today. Thanks, guys.
Sure.
Take care.
Yep. The more that I study this, and that's what I was talking about, the 1,000,000 volts per meter on the body and the skin, I'm learning about this healing technique, this apparatus called a velvet wand or violet wand. It's not a velvet wand, it's a violet wand. And Nikola Tesla invented it, and it was curing all sorts of people's ailments. And then it was taken off the shelf by the 1950s by the FDA because they wanted to use drugs and everything instead of electrical voltage healing. The body is voltage. Jerry Tenen. This is all very real, and that voltage that you want to have your body at, you can increase it with this tool. And you can literally charge yourself up with this tool. You just sit there and hold it. You can hold a light bulb, and the light bulb glows in your hand. So this Nikola Tesla, think of his energy and his energy field. I don't know if anybody talked about him being radiant and amazing. Probably not, because he hated people and he was a recluse, and he hid from everybody because he didn't like to share his energy. He thought that it took away from his, like people were enervating him and taking his energy field, which they probably were.
So I have another story I can share. I have a patient, and she is part of a legit Hindu sect. Okay. And she invited me to go to Chicago to see her Swami. So I met the guy. He was a bookworm. Okay. He's a very learned guy, very soft hands. He's been studying a lot of papers. But I can tell you this, the picture that they use of his Swami, that picture radiates. And it radiates in a qualitative way. It's not just that, yes, there's the effect of no matter where you go in the room, it's looking at you. But it's not only looking at you, it's actually communicating with your spirit, and you can feel it. And this Swami, who's deceased, obviously, his his positive affect, his happiness, his radiant love was encoded into the photograph. And it was a legit photograph, not a digital photograph. It was an old school photograph. And so the light was there, and it was in his affect. The previous Swami to that was a painting. So I didn't, I mean, it was a drawing of some kind. So it didn't have the same effect. But there was something incredibly qualitative about that experience of just sitting there, listening to this guy drone on, and then, but when the chanting happened, there was a good experience. But no matter what time, the beginning, the middle, the end, whatever, the picture was radiating in a way that did not the similar experience to the deer park over in California, where all the people are practicing Zen, but they're all miserable. It was a legit happiness and a legit encoding into that picture. And if that could be replicated, if we could velvet wand that and then spread it to every house and spread it on the TV and spread it in Congress and all the parliaments, it would change the world. That'd be a good thing. Let's find that voltage or that field, whatever that is. I mean, I don't know. Haven't had the chance.
How do you measure the light emitting out your body? Does it all come out your eyeballs, or does it come out your skin and run everywhere?
Everything, the whole body.
Yeah, the whole body.
Yeah, you can feel it coming out of your whole body, especially when you're charged. Like, I mean,
I think a lot more comes out your eyes, you know, for some reason.
Oh yeah, it comes out. A lot comes out of your eyes. That's where everybody looks. That's where all animals look. It's all the information. It's all the dilation of pupils. We're so used to the donut, we don't even realize it. We don't even realize it. Donut, get it? Ah. Yeah, I have to do a second video for sure, at least. Getting way deeper into the Taurus than my first one.
I can tell you this, the book that I recommend for people on this light is The Secret of the Golden Flower, because it was written to be non-religious by the Taoists. It was written to help them to develop this light. And they make it very clear that the whole person radiates. And in fact, in the Huangdi Neijing, which is about 2,400 to 2,600 years old, it says, the Huangdi asks Chibo, how did the ancients heal? And he says, in the old days, they didn't even use needles or herbs or anything. They just used something called the Tong Shen Ming, the penetrating spiritual brightness. Another way of translating is divine penetrating light. And the Tong Shen Ming, they would take the pulse for 30 minutes and then they would cast the energy out of the person. They would cast it away. Now, I've used the Tong Shen Ming, and it works. It works very well. Of course, people don't want to pay for the Tong Shen Ming, so you end up still doing acupuncture. But I always try to make sure that it's a day like today. There's a reason why we're able to have this discussion. The type of day it is, the way the energies are moving. These things are not accidental. And it goes back to the debate that I was having with Jay as to whether or not yuga time and its sense of infinite rearrangement of we've been here forever is real or a psychological thing, because in the West we have an insistence upon the chronological factual time of this thing happened 12,000 years ago, then 3,000 years ago, blah blah blah, and that sense that you have when you are in that, and I know Buddy felt it before, when you feel it and everything is gold and it's like the kingdom, and it just feels like it goes forever, and that you're one being that has just had lots of shells. There's no scientific proof for it, but it is such a profound experience. It's such a continuous, like this pervasive sense.
There's scientific proof for it. There's a bunch of scientific proof. It's the human energy field, and
well, I'm only talking about the time part. That everything has been going on. Then you can understand why some people do believe that we walked around with dinosaurs and stuff. But as far as finding actual physical evidence, it's very difficult. And it's also difficult to separate the fact that they're having a psychological experience. Even though they're awake, they may not even be on psychedelics. They might be literally just having a yogic experience because they're practicing yoga or they're practicing meditation or they're doing whatever it is to enter the kingdom. And it's an interesting phenomenon, and it's certainly an interesting conundrum because maybe we have to induce this. Maybe that's what the Ark of the Covenant did in the Holiest of Holies. And that is a little bit of a open segue, so Sean can talk if he wants to. But I think it's important because if we can find this frequency band or this form of charge, however we need to approach it, I think it will really quite change the world. And obviously there will be a threat because the guy who created the Oregon accumulator, I mean, they threw him in prison and he died of a heart attack. I mean, the FDA came after him. So I have no doubt they will try. Go ahead.
That was Wilhelm Reich.
Reich, yeah.
Yeah, the Oregon guy, yeah. And it's quite, it's an interesting concept that he had. I mean, he was layering sort of paper, wasn't he? Different types of paper around to try and trap this energy field in a pyramid and things like that. He was doing a couple of
Organite.
Yeah, there was all the Organite experiments, and I think there was kind of sex magic involved in it as well. So I think that's what got him in the end. They always used to get him for sex magic, didn't they? You know.
Yeah, that's strange. I interviewed Dale Pond a couple times, and we were talking about heaven and all this other stuff and blah blah blah, and I forget the exact question, but like his answer was orgasm and sex, and I'm like, wow, like, okay.
Well, the book of Balance and Harmony says that their sexual alchemy can either be the lowest vehicle or one of the three highest. If you divide the upper vehicle, the upper set of alchemies into three, it can be the medium one. It can't be the uppermost. But it also points out, though, that it can be the lowest vehicle because people become, of course, obsessed with sex.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, are you going to talk to us or what?
Hey, yeah, hi guys. How you guys doing today? Not too long ago as usual. My normal weekday. I'm waking up late. You know, I have no idea what you guys were talking about.
Well, I did want to poke your brain about what you could know about the Ark of the Covenant in case you might know something we don't.
Ooh. That's some good shows. Didn't Robert Hawthorne's dad do a show on that before? Didn't he talk about that before? He was reading from he had a book that he was reading from and using as a source, and it was very interesting. He was talking about like some sort of electrical device. You guys remember that show? Some type of device that you remember it?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah,
I wasn't on that.
He was supposed to send me a copy of the book. He never did, but that's okay.
There are people on the hunt for that as we speak. Alan Green and Robert Edward Grant.
Yeah, who isn't always on the hunt for that? It's been apparently my door just opened on its own. Wow, maybe that's really weird. That's really weird. The Ark of the Covenant. Maybe we should go look for it. That's a sign, dude. The door is open.
It could be.
Built replicas.
Or maybe
it's that's it. They reckon there are a number of replicas, and also the actual Temple Mount. I've seen there's some debate as to whether that was the original Temple of Solomon on there, or whether it was sort of like 100 yards further west. In which case, there could be still something under that. under that particular building. So there's probably a few tricks been done. I mean, there's legends of it, of course, getting carried all over the place. But one of them is meant to be in this town in Ethiopia, which has recently been completely smashed up, and we don't know. We haven't had any news out of that place.
Yeah, they said that they've been saying that for like since 1992 or an older. But they're
No, this is very recently. This is very recently. This has happened.
No, I know. I've heard this, but I've heard this so long ago. I've heard this same thing back in the 90s, and I saw a History Channel thing about it. But they're not allowed to show anybody. So that's the thing. It's like we have it, but you can't see it. So okay, where's the proof?
There's something there because the guys who are the custodians of that device develop all sorts of radiation diseases. They don't survive very long after. So there's clearly something there. But you've had people or organisations doing research who have actually built an arc to the exact specifications described, and it's like a giant capacitor.
Yeah, it's a capacitor. It's the golden. It's the golden ratio. It's the golden mean. It's a box that's based off of the golden proportions, the divine proportions.
The only debate is whether anything else was inside the ark to begin with. Claim that the original tablets of the laws of Moses were written.
I'd say radioactive material, transmuted material from either the Ben stone itself or an asteroid, something that came off of Saturn. And,
whatever it is, but
or Venus.
People often worship meteorites. That's what's in the center of the rock of the dome.
Yep.
It's a meteorite. So.
Yep.
A meteorite's normally radioactive.
Well, this would be an unusual one, I would assume. The thing is, like Australia's covered in uranium. I don't think all of it was transmuted on the ground. I think some of it was transmuted, material that fell.
Well, I was having this discussion with my colleague on the weekend, and I said, if the Earth was supposed to be a big molten ball of rock, completely molten from the surface to the center, then there shouldn't be any heavy elements on the surface. They should all, quietly float into the center of the Earth and disappear. So the stuff we see on the surface, there's only one place that, if you take the mainstream model, that the minerals that exist on the surface, the heavy elements, there's only one place it can come from, and that's from outer space onto the Earth. Rain like water does on the Earth, and develop up a crustal layer that's rich with heavy elements. So either the story we have, according to the mainstream, is just rubbish, or we got to pay much better attention to the oral history and stop dismissing it just because it's oral history or it's mythological or whatever. Science has got to.
Well, Jay's not here for you to argue with, but if you can get a hold of the debates from the last 24 hours, you would see what they were about, and it was a lot about that topic. But him and Teddy were going back and forth about math. My part of the Ark of the Covenant, I don't know if Willis and Black had it correct, or those people down in Africa have it, or it's completely lost. I think we should rebuild and put materials in it that we think are likely to generate charge and see what would happen. I imagine it will create an arc between the two. People might get better just by thinking they're going to get better. But I do have no doubt that they were chanting stuff. And if you've read, The Secrets of Abramelin and the Mage, the Kabbalistic technique does involve doing a form of magic that has a predefined space, and which only an acolyte, a male acolyte, obviously a young boy, can go in and out of. And there can be no women touch the sacred space. And so it goes all the way back to this Kabbalah, goes all the way back to the holiest of the holies. And they must have been chanting and praying very assiduously to get into certain state, basically the equivalent of an entheogenic state. and atavistic is what they call that. And in that state, who knows what experience they had with or without the Ark of the Covenant, it being an actual real generator. But I believe it probably was some form of generator. I know that it didn't fit inside of the sarcophagus at the fake sarcophagus there at the Great Pyramid, so those two things are not related. And that's because I did the actual 3D model in SketchUp and tried to get it to fit, and it wouldn't. So it could have been the same materials. Maybe all of Egypt had access and knew at one point what would go into the Ark. But if Moses was a real guy, and I believe Moshe was a real person, and he really had Egyptian training, he could have taken what he knew about what was in the Great Pyramid's so-called coffin and put it into the Ark of the Covenant, or commanded the Jews how to do it, the Hebrews at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, so
So it's interesting that you're bringing this stuff up, because I had that quasi debate with the guy on my friend Jacob's channel, and I didn't get into detail about a lot of things, but I did want to talk about when you have diorite statues. If you have a Dremel these days with a carburized diamond tip, you can carve into diorite. You can granite, basalt. Look at tombstones and things of that nature. Well, they either had power tools back then or something other than just a steel iron chisel, I would think. Because what I'm looking at, I'm like, damn, this is really precisely done. Um, Even in the, I think it's the temple at Luxor, you have one wall in the chamber that has the Ramses era hieroglyphs, and they're raised off of the stone, really precisely done, etc. But on the right, 4 feet away on the other side of the wall, they say there's 1,000 years difference, and you have Alexander's hieroglyphs and pictures, if you will, cut into the stone, but very, 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 very precisely done. I mean, really precise. And I'm like, I can take a Dremel and I can take a cast iron cylinder head from a vehicle, and I can actually do some cleanup work and the ports and everything real nice and precise and everything. Well, it almost implies that these people had some type of tools or whatever other than just chisels and hammers. You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, well, there's no proof of that, but a lot of iron and things of that nature would have been useful to resmelt, reuse, et cetera, so on. You have granite in the Great Pyramid. There was also an iron, smelted iron slab right at that entrance where they blew the hole in to get inside in the first place. And I'm like, that's just very odd, peculiar. At the beginning of the Iron Age, you wouldn't have the best of the best at the very beginning of it. It would probably take some time, I would think, and you would develop better weapons and better tools over time. But it seems that the tools they were using were a lot better than maybe we envision in our heads. So some type of an electrical device. They didn't have batteries. Like we can have battery powered tools even to this day. Like sawzalls and things. We have the portable batteries. We can pop it in, drills, things of that nature. They were using something. I just don't think it was.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Chisels,
If it was
chisels
compressed
and
air, possibly, I
something.
agree
I
with
mean,
that, or even warp pressurized water. But I'd agree they had some form of high rotary power tools. I agree with that.
something. Yeah, something other than just. They're definitely not copper tools. I mean, what they find in abundance. You're not using copper to cut and carve things like diorite. You need copperized steel, but then you need a means to be able to do it. Like you just said, maybe compressed air. I don't know.
I'm kind of interested that the Iron Age started after the Bronze Age.
I think
You
there's
need
clear
something.
evidence that shows that Egypt went through a process very similar to what happened in Europe, where you had a technology civilization that decayed. In the case of Egypt, never recovered. The real issue here is that There are stoneware jars that modern production methods cannot even figure out how they were made. You can't even drill out the inside because of the narrow neck and things like that. And I think some of these things may well have been heat printed stoneware jars. In other words, you use a 3D printer mechanism and you produce the tapered vessel directly, and that implies machine technology which is powered. But hieroglyphic carvings on stone walls and indicate that they had, copies of things that would imply these things were there. And the Egyptologist guys who don't want to accept the evidence that they see with their own eyes make up a story to explain the hieroglyphs and saying, oh, it's just all fictitious, made up stuff. And you don't go and carve this rock with the precision that it has, with the pictures that are made on it, just because on a whim. It's not imagination. I just think that it's pseudoscience. The explanation is pseudoscience. It's like Saturn's rings, that news article that came out in the last couple of days. It's saying 2 moons smashed together to create the ice rings around around Saturn, sorry, and ignoring completely the evidence. Just make up a story. You've read something, you've watched something, and you just make up a story. What you're being paid for is making up a good story. And I reckon if they're going to take that approach in astronomy, I reckon I got a better explanation as to how the Saturn rings came into existence. Harry Potter travelled back in time and his wand stuffed up. And you got Saturn's rings. Just as good an explanation as any other. So what we've got in our modern environment is this pseudoscience stuff that nobody is just calling out as fake to begin.
What do you mean nobody? All of us are.
Well, according to them guys, we're pseudoscientists. But in our defence, I'd like to see these guys produce any evidence at all that the material universe we experience is made up of something other than photons, electrons, and protons. And until they can do that, all their speculations are, based on rubbish.
Well, and more to the point, and this is out of that study I did of the Union 5 and 8, the approach of creating a technocracy in order to utilize physics to try and govern the big G is not going to work. You can't take out, and even using mathematics through mathemagics to try and control it, it's not going to work. It's going to create bad effects because of the properties. Anyways, you can get that sense from the diagrams. The truth is that we don't want to be on their bus because their bus is going over a cliff, and it's good that we're not on the bus. And I don't count us as nobody. I don't count you as nobody, Robert. So I think that the onus is on them. If they make an extraordinary claim, such as the majority of the universe is made of stuff that you can't even measure, then they have to produce the results. And until then, they're the frauds, and we're not frauds. We have a definition for pseudoscience. It's on the gateway, and we have working materials that we are willing to go forward with. Now, the debate, I know you missed this, the debate about whether or not we can have multiverse. Well, I don't have multiverse in EPEMC for a reason. We don't have any proof of it. We have mathematical suspicions, and there's at least six different kinds of the multiverse based on mathematical potentialities. And then of those different kinds, there might be some that have 13 dimensions, some that have 100 dimensions, some that only have 1 dimension, as far as we know. It could be that every time there's a new dimension, there's a new universe, so you have an infinite number of dimensions, blah, blah, blah. But right now, we don't have any proof of that. What we have is a 3-dimensional universe that marks changes through time. And that's what we've got to focus on. And I don't particularly have any interest in focusing on how old the Earth is or going back. The guys who are debating about the moon and everything aren't here for the most part. So I'll just bring us back to the discussion that we're having, which is about thoughts about DNA. I'm interested in what happened to Egypt. I'm interested in how they engineered this society. The society had staying power. Was it a cataclysm that ended it, or was there a whimsical problem? Was it that they worshiped the dead, and as soon as they started worshiping the dead, then it started to go downhill? We don't know, but we need that data because we're on that sort of precipice, I think. And I'm not just saying that because of the age of the unlost stuff. I'm saying that because of the amount of poisons that we're producing. If it were just that people were materialistic and shallow and rude to each other, I wouldn't be so worried. But it's the active production of poisons in all the things that matter. The entire owner's philosophy, oxygen, water, nutrients, energy, rest, and sleep. There's toxins being produced for all of those things. And now target is the children. And the only thing I can come to is either a profound disease, mental disease of self-eradication, rooted in a lot of bad philosophies, or aliens. Because I can't imagine a God that would want to do that to us. And we're certainly enabling it. We're not doing it to ourselves. We're certainly enabling it. And we've got to engineer.
Maybe it's just a case of where we've got people who want to control the environment. So because of past disaster, they want to control everything, and the process create a disaster that destroys everything. And I think that's what's really happening. I think Egypt went through a series of cataclysms. The question is whether it was done by the Egyptians or others. Hard to say, or whether they were natural events that occurred because the Earth was moving around in the solar system. Anything's possible. It's just we don't have the records to say what it is. And people who claim to know everything about the past, my first argument was, well, where's the evidence that you've lived on this planet for the last 20,000 years? And if they can't produce that, then whatever they're talking about in terms of history can't be accurate. They didn't experience it, so how the hell can they claim to know it?
Yeah, that does gets dicey. There are certain people. I'm not saying that Jay is one of those people, but I'm just saying that there seems to be a tendency to come to a hard conclusion about the cycles of destruction, or the cycles of rebirth, or the cycles of religion. And these things tend to get stuck in people's heads. And Sean knows who I'm specifically referring to, and they think that they have exact, precise dates for things that are so long. There's no way. There's no way.
Yeah, you got to be loose on your approach towards that for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think so.
There's more problems.
Don't get into numerology at all.
There's so many problems. It's pathetic.
Yeah.
It's and mainstream people ignore it totally. Like we're just gonna look past this and we're gonna try to explain it away, or even going back to the times of the excavations. It's just so flaky. It's so flaky. You have no idea how it's very, very flaky, and it's like it really doesn't add up. None of it adds up as far as trying to date this stuff.
But claiming exact dates and all the rest of it is falling for the uniformitarian model of Earth, that nothing changes over the long term, that you don't have catastrophes, the rest of it. And we've got modern day evidence that says catastrophes occur, and the environment changes dramatically. So any dating mechanism that relies on the slow geological processes is flawed. But what we've got a science, people who are investigating things come up with a theory and then delude themselves into thinking that they've got the answer. That's what we're suffering from, is self-induced delusion.
Yeah, they call that the mass formation psychosis, right? And that's the thing, is it's definitely tied to the poisons. The question is, what are the karmic causes and what are the outflows? Which I think we all know cancer is the least of the problems when it comes to the outflows from this poison epidemic. The real epidemic. There's only two epidemics that are real: the poison epidemic and the stupid. And this mass formation psychosis, I think, is a natural reaction. But there probably is a lot of Mein Kampf kind of things going on with it, though. CIA knows what they're doing, and they utilize those studies to hack us. There's hacking going on, and probably through 5G, but I'd like to see physical proof. I have anecdotal proof in my own life, but I'd like to see physical proof.
I mean, like when was the spark gap experiment done at the Royal Institute many years ago? Where people were like, "Oh, here's a spark gap. Watch this." So you mean to tell me that ancient people had copper and didn't do the same thing ever? Never. They built these great monuments. We can argue when they were built or who built them or whatever, but yeah, they couldn't do the same thing 1,000 years or 2,000 years prior to the spark gap experiment being done. They had copper, then
a piece of leather. I think you need leather and copper, and you build a Van de Graaff generator.
Like what makes us think that? I mean, Chris Dunn's work, I thought when he did that show was pretty good. He's supposed to release a second book or something. Just and if we're thinking outside the box, oh no, please don't think outside the box. Oh no, you're not allowed to think outside the box. This way, and this is the way it is.
Well, if you think outside the box, there's a good chance you destroy your pet theory and your gravy train of money. That's going to keep your bones alive.
Yeah. Do you reckon there's any way they could potentially electrically etch the stone using a Van de Graaff generator to actually remove small particles?
Sure, you can do electrical machining. You could do electrical plating.
Yeah.
You can put metal on plastic. So it's a case of, and you don't need electricity. You can use it with chemical processes. The assumption is that we're the only people that have discovered these things. It's like Arthur Eddington claiming that, I've got proof that gravity bends light. And his own team said you can explain these results just using traditional, well-established Newtonian optics to explain why the light's bending. And Edward Downey has shown that is actually true. And the mainstream just refuses to accept the evidence of experiment. And on that basis, they're all pseudoscientific. They just refuse to accept it. And when you got things like the Baghdad batteries, which don't go back as far as the pyramids do, apparently, well then, if the people of Persia had and Babylon had batteries and chemical electrical generation, then how can you say that nobody else in the world at that time or before had that technology available to them? You're just defying reasonableness tests. This technology will progress around the world just because you got merchants and trading and all the rest of it. And there was the Mediterranean civilization collapsed at, 3100 BCE because of some sort of climatic change. And the Bronze Age ended, and the Iron Age started afterwards. So, but there was a period of total destruction because people were starving. And the real problem I have with a lot of this sort of stuff is because somebody who claims to be an expert hasn't had real experience of it themselves personally, they reckon it doesn't happen. And that's the wrong approach. And I reckon, Professor Dave was given a script and paid to do his bloody hatchet job on Wal Thornhill, but the trouble is the stuff he used is easily shown to be not true.
Well, who's he going to do next is the question. Who's Professor Dave going to go after?
Well, maybe he should actually go and finish his master's and then get his PhD But you know, I was watching a video where he says he taught chemistry. I think it was for about 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years before he lost his job because he hadn't got qualifications. But he says he didn't really like doing chemistry. So the question you got to ask is, you know, what the hell's he playing at? But you can describe chemical behavior with, you know, if I get X amount of these materials and put them in a pot and heat them up, I get this chemical outcome. But I don't think Professor Dave can explain why that reaction occurs in the first place. And what Professor Dave doesn't understand, that the chemistry that we have today requires valencies, and valencies are chemical or electrical charge driven things. So he doesn't understand the processes. And if we're going to talk about what sort of energy is involved in getting a chemical reaction going, it's electromagnetic. It has to be electromagnetic. There's no other alternative because the only things that are in there are electrical and magnetic material interactions. You know, the whole system's refusing to accept the evidence. And that's, you know, should be clear to anybody who thinks about why these things occur as opposed to just accepting the spoon-fed answer.
What gets me is just such an ugly bastard. That's what. That's about it, really.
Well, you know, there's a statement of you start to look like what you are on the inside.
I think so, yeah. And he looks
And
like a really smarmy, horrible slime ball.
well, he's Italian, so the question you got to ask yourself is, you know, among other things, is what is his real connections into the society? But my bigger problem is that, you know, people who are ugly on the inside typically are ugly on the outside because it just goes through the system that way.
Yeah, I think I could observe that myself, I think. In general.
Jordan Peterson did a video on something called reputation derogation, and it fits Professor Dave perfectly, and it's in the literature he's been saying for the last 50 years, and he doesn't care if other psychologists don't know about it. It's there. It's just like when you're in high school. He goes back to high school. Some girls are sitting at a table, and some other girls walk by, and they say, "You can't sit here because you guys are fat." The girls are probably not going to do anything, or if they tell a teacher, then they're just looked at as, "Oh, you can't handle your own problems," or whatever. But if there's a bunch of guys sitting down and they say, "Hey, you can't come over here and sit down," or whatever, for whatever reasons, we're going to raise up real quick and say, "Hey, what'd you say, man?" And we're going to be very confrontational about it, and we're probably going to fight. Okay. But now with social media, you have people that are narcissists that just do that. You're going to attack a person's reputation and try to push that person into what they call this cancel culture thing. But these Generation Y and Z kids do, though they're the product of us, they would say, that's older people. It goes unchecked on social media. So you can set up a platform and use reputation derogation against people, and nothing happens. And it's just how social media ticks. We can't say, "Hey, what did you say, Professor Dave?" Because we're not there to confront him. He uses that passive aggressive, narcissistic attitude to just beat down on a person's reputation where the person can't do anything about it. You can respond on social media, but what's that going to do? Pretty much nothing. But that's a psychological thing that's going on, that he says that social media actually reinforces this negative psychological behavior, is what he's saying, without saying Professor Dave's name. I was like, well, wow, what do you know? What do you have
He
here?
seems to have a few little acolytes as well, though. I mean,
But he won't
I think
engage.
I might have put the odd comment on his show, derogatory comment on his show.
Yeah.
And I think one of his acolytes gave me a couple of responses. But yeah, so there's a little club of them. They like Beavis and Butthead. I think that's the kind of kick they're getting, really. They're a collective Beavis and Butthead, as far as I can see it.
Just a
Troll.
troll club. Professor Dave's troll club. But
Yeah,
the
that's
real
it.
issue
That's
here
it.
is if Professor Dave's being honest, he should have Wal Thornhill there and fucking have a proper debate where he puts forward his evidence and Wal can knock him down. You know, he won't take on Robertilli anymore, will he?
No, not a chance.
After he's been shown you don't know what you're talking about.
Ate him alive, yeah, absolutely.
But there's other videos where he tried this trick before and he's been demolished because he doesn't know what he's talking about. I think Professor Dave, being a narcissist, is also suffering from teacher syndrome because he taught something and knew it backwards, that he thinks he knows everything, which is a problem.
Well, he actually thinks he knows what is the consensus opinion of the world, and he follows that. He seems to follow that. He seems to follow a consensus. Now, whose consensus it is, I don't know. I'm not really sure about.
Well, I reckon that stuff he produced the last time round was he was given a script, and paid to present it.
Yeah.
There's no way knowing he's got the skill level in astronomy and the tracking ability to come up with all the stuff that presented, which has alternative explanations that he just refused to talk to. You know, there are papers out there that describe the electrical behavior of in astronomy that he didn't even go near, and everything he relied on is the mainstream Ty Grayson DeGrasse style, explanation of a theory that doesn't work.
Don't give him any publicity at all. He just needs bloody dropping that guy.
You just need to
ignore it. It's scientism. He's just reiterating scientism.
But the people who fed him the script need to be thrown out of their jobs.
I don't think it was a script that was fed to him.
I think that's the culture at university. Right. I think that's what the academic culture is like.
There is a lot of ghostwriters. You're right. That makes sense. The college is taking over the social media and acting like trolls, but they're not. They're actually academic scholars.
Yeah, and they talk like trolls.
They're trying to maintain the grant system that gives them, a nice house and lifestyle. They're not about to tell everybody that it's all bullshit, are they?
Mm-mm.
You're not going to go and build a CERN to discover that, the reasons why you built it had nothing to do with what you claimed in the media was what it
Yeah.
CERN's cost over, on its way to $2 trillion. LIGO's on its way to $1 billion. And, what was the real reason for building these devices? Webb telescope, what was the real reason for building that? Apparently they're at Mars, so,
Fire a massive laser beam, maybe.
With movies and shows like Stranger Things, people are going to think that they built this stuff for to release demons and to open portals, and who knows? Maybe they could have, and are trying.
Maybe it's just trying to get the world ready for this ET invasion that they want to have. Fake war.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to call it a good evening. Till next time.
Yeah, I'll see you guys later as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Catch you soon.
Have a
Cheers,
good,
Ramon.
The geometric view is love is watching product. Love is watching being. Thank you for doing that. Keep your eyeballs out. Pay attention. There's a lot going down this year. Be vigilant. Be mindful. Be insightful. Be loving. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being kind. Share the love. Spread the love. Become the love. Amen.
brand new season of the Geometric View, Season 7. We're not going to stop. We're just getting started. We're like a newborn. We're like an infant. We're just getting our life, starting to crawl right up your skin and into your ears.
Eyes all up at the wall, eyes all up in your body. Can I just see straight through with transparent golden scaling? The largest of the edifice embark on this because this is the journey. The journey is life. Take hold. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Join us in the fight for Christ, in the fight to save lives. Surprise, submersible, so fast, the first, the last of baptism, need to say more. Pay attention like the marrow in your bones, arrow in your back, arrow in your lungs, zero into the back, tertiary Christian neuron, synapses and narrow entrance into eternity. I'm a courier, a charismatic attitude, monometers even meter, it might even be fun. Cider indeed, need nerds, you need nerds, need a virtue, need to be a reason. Feasibility to be a reason to be clean and sober, keys, open doors, signs of directions. Be the carrier of candlesticks, the man who brought you change. Every second you ride, to make your ribbon, you pivot, potential, you curve and cat, could be cold, could be copycat, could be comedy corpse, could be Schrodinger's best, could be Micro Hacker, Mackie Normo, open-minded, itsy bitsy, freaking huge, a universal supermassive aspect of attached awareness. Aware of this all? Collaborative consumption. Are you aware of this all? Collaborative consumption. The new thing consumption. Collaborative consumption. Consumption. Get up now! Out of the boat! Drop! Where did this up? We don't got about a girl, but about a goddess girl. Get up, what's up? Get out, tap girls.
All music in the Geometric View episodes is produced and created by Skullet. That's
SKULLET.
I'm in search of, I'm in earth love, I'm in living life, I'm in living color, I'm an air drop, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing. I'm a